Good afternoon, everyone. The June 25th, 2024 regular council meeting is called to order at 4 o'clock. Council would like to acknowledge the Ucluelet on whose traditional territories the District of Ucluelet operates. Audience members and delegates are advised that this proceeding is being video recorded and broadcast on YouTube and Zoom, which may store data on foreign servers. Has Council received the late items?
Yes.
Councillor Mafty, have you got the late items?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, okay, thank
Excellent.
you. May I have a motion to amend the June 25th, 2024 regular council meeting agenda by adding the late item titled Additional Public Hearing Written Submissions Related to Bylaw Numbers 1337, 2024 and 1322, 2024 under Public Hearing Item 5.1.3 and adding the late item titled Letter of Support Request for the Rain Coast Education Society as correspondence item 10.4.
So moved.
Councillor Anderson moves.
Second.
Councillor Kennington seconds. All in favor? None opposed, and that carries. We have a bit of a time lag with Councillor Mafty, so I'm giving a little extra time for voting. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Councillor Kennington,
Second.
Councillor Anderson, all in favor? None opposed, that carries. The next item is 4.1, April 30th, 2024 regular council meeting minutes. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, may I have a motion to adopt the April 30th, 2024 regular council meeting minutes as presented?
So moved.
Councillor Anderson,
Second.
Councillor Kennington, all in favor? None opposed, that carries. We will now conduct a public hearing on District of Ucluelet Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw Number 1337, 2024 and District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw Number 1322, 2024. These bylaws relate to the property at 1061 Helen Road. As provided for in the Local Government Act, Council is required to hold a public hearing before adopting a zoning bylaw, an official community plan bylaw, or amendments thereto unless a public hearing is prohibited by the Local Government Act or waived by Council in accordance with that Act. At the conclusion of this hearing, it will be closed. Once the public hearing is closed, Council cannot accept further communications or presentations from the applicant or public representing the proposed bylaws, respecting the proposed bylaws, unless Council decides to hold an additional public hearing. Please note there will be no decisions made during this hearing, and Council is under no obligation to enter into debate on any issue. Council will consider the bylaws later in the meeting's agenda after the hearing is closed. The purpose of this hearing is to hear from the public before third reading of the bylaws. Council may consider amending the proposed bylaws based on input received at this public hearing. At a public hearing, all persons who deem their interest in property affected by the proposed bylaws will be given an opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions on matters contained in the bylaws. However, all who speak must restrict their comments to the subject bylaws, and it is my responsibility to ensure that all remarks are so restricted. You will have 5 minutes to address Council for the first time. Staff will advise you at the 4-minute mark and when your time is up. After everyone has spoken once, those wishing to speak again will have an opportunity. After hearing submissions from members of the public, Council may ask questions to clarify what has been said. However, this is not a Q&A session or town hall meeting. To maintain an atmosphere that is respectful of all points of view, it is important for the audience to refrain from applauding or cheering for speakers. Today, members of the public can participate in person or electronically. All speakers must state their name and address. And I'll turn it over to our Manager of Corporate Services.
The subject bylaws, related materials, and the District of Euclid zoning bylaw and District of Euclid official community plan are available for review at the back table in the room here and on the district's website. The public can participate in this hearing in person, by phone, by Zoom, or by email to communityinput@euclid.ca. To speak in person, raise your hand when the mayor calls for in-person speakers. The mayor will call on you when it's your turn. Please speak from the mic at the podium. To speak by Zoom, click the raise hand icon when the mayor calls for speakers via Zoom. When it's your turn, the clerk will call on you by your name, so please ensure it's your first and last name. To speak by phone, press *9 when the mayor calls for speakers calling in. When it's your turn, the moderator or the clerk will call on you by the last 3 digits of your phone number. Press *6 to unmute yourself. Any unpublished emails about the bylaw received at communityinput@euclid.ca before the end of the public hearing will be read into the record. Please put the bylaw numbers in the subject line and keep your emails short. Published correspondence will not be read. For further details about how to participate by Zoom, telephone, or email, please visit euclid.ca/public hearings.
And just to clarify, published correspondence has been read. It just won't be read out loud. I now declare the public hearing for District of Euclid Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 1337, 2024, and District of Euclid Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1322, 2024 open. The Director of Community Planning will now provide a brief overview of these bylaws. After the Director speaks, I will call 3 times for public input. Welcome, Mr. Gregg.
Thank you. And through the mayor, in just general broad terms, the purpose of the official community plan amendment bylaw number 1337, 2024, is to amend the District of Euclid official community plan bylaw number 1306 from 2022 to change the designation of the property at 1061 Helen Road from single-family residential to multifamily residential on Schedule A, which is the long-range land use plan within the OCP bylaw. And then the second bylaw that's the subject of the public hearing is the zoning amendment bylaw number 1322, 2024. And again, in general terms, the purpose of this amending bylaw is to amend the District of Euclid zoning bylaw, which is bylaw number 1160 from 2013, to permit multiple family residential as the allowable principal use on the same property at 1061 Helen Road in the form of one or multiple buildings up to 6 dwelling units and a maximum total combined gross floor area of 1,200 square meters. And I would just note, because I'm not sure that the applicant is here to present their application, that on page 27 of the agenda, which has the prior staff reports that have gone, just for comparison of the existing zoning, there's a comparison in 2 boxes. One of what is being requested is a total of 6 units of residential use in 1,200 square meters, whereas the existing zoning would permit a total of 6 units of combined residential tourist accommodation uses and the same maximum floor area of the 1,200 square meters. That's it.
Does council have any questions for Mr. Gregg? No?
I got a quick one. Would that be one, if you were comparing to a single family house with 6 units, I guess, albeit without an ADU? So if you took 1,200 square meters and you put that into square feet, it's about 15,000 roughly. So is the comparison for the single family, is that one building, or is that's one building plus an ADU? Would that be right?
Through the mayor, the measure of the 1,200 square meters, 15,000 square feet roughly, that's the total floor area of all buildings on the property, either way. So that would be whether it's a single-family house main building or any accessory buildings, whether they're used for something like an accessory dwelling unit or a garage or greenhouse or garden shed, or total floor area of, on all levels of all the above, is what that number refers to, the floor area ratio.
Okay, thank you.
So we are now moving on to the applicant presentation section of this public hearing. Do we know if the applicant is online?
Applicant, if you're online, please click the raise hand icon. There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. We are now moving on to the public input section of this public hearing. This is the first call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to address the bylaws? All right, you can proceed to the mic, Patricia.
Now it's green. Oh, this is a new one. Good evening, Your Worship, Mayor McEwen and members of the council. You have in writing the basis of our objections to the request for rezoning of 1061 Helen Road. I wanted to highlight our three main points. Number one, please do not be pressured by all the criticism you have faced recently regarding the lack of housing and the delays in the approval process. Number two, no development happens in isolation. Your decision regarding this request for rezoning will set a precedent for the future development of High Focus. Please remember that. 3, the only access road and the causeway linking High Focus to the mainland cannot handle the increase in traffic that would occur if this rezoning triggers more rezoning requests that would allow for multiple family dwellings. So thank you for your careful consideration. I'm Patricia Sieber at 1058 Helen Road.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other members of the public attending in person who wish to speak? Are there any members of the public attending by Zoom that wish to speak? Click the raise hand icon.
There are no raised hands at this time.
Thank you. And are there any speakers calling in? Press star 9 if you wish to speak.
There appears to be no callers as well.
And we do have some late items that are written input on this topic. Have we received any unpublished correspondence about the bylaws to communityinput@ucluelet.ca?
There are no additional emails at this time.
Thank you. This will be the second call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to bylaw number 1337, 2024, or bylaw number 1322, 2024? Yes. Please make your way to the podium.
Anything? I'm not going to press anything. I'm Christine Skoukas. I live at 1123. Do I have to press? It's green. Okay. 1123 Helen Road, which is the last house before the causeway to High Focus. This is a detrimental proposal for me and my home. There is nowhere for the road to go. I am not willing to provide any space in my property, which is a drop off from the road, to be used for access. This high density is just, it's a slippery slope. As soon as you allow it for one, it's going to happen for everywhere. And we need, in my opinion, to maintain the integrity of our community. This is not the community I need. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any speakers on Zoom?
If anyone on Zoom wishes to speak, please raise your hand. No hands are risen at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in?
If you are calling in, please dial star 9. And there are none at this time.
And are there any additional written public input through community input at ucluelet.ca?
There are no new emails at this time.
Thank you. This will be the third and final call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to the bylaws? Seeing none, are there any speakers on Zoom?
If you wish to speak, please raise your hand. There are no hands raised.
And are there any speakers calling in?
If you are calling in and wish to speak, please dial *9. And there are none.
And are there any new emails to communityinput at ucluelet.ca?
There are no emails.
Okay, I now declare the public hearing for District of Ucluelet Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 1337-2024 and District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1322-2024 closed at 4:16 p.m. There is one unfinished business item, 6.1 Development Application Procedures Input. This report was deferred from our last council meeting, and it will be presented by the Director of Community Planning, Mr. Gregg.
There we are. Thank you, through the mayor. As you'll recall, our last council meeting ran a little long, so this was deferred. We've tried to create a nice, slim, streamlined agenda for today, so we won't hopefully go as long. It's only 413 pages, I think, today. So this report is really on. It provides a few things, some background information. There's the attachments include the provincial report on development application process review, which is relevant to this, as well as a copy of the existing 2015 Ucluelet Development Application Procedures Bylaw, and also as a comparison, Tofino quite recently went through a process. They were involved in the development application process review, and have an updated procedures bylaw as part of that. So it's a useful comparison, and also it's always handy to see sort of how on the West Coast do our bylaws compare. Wherever possible, we try to align them just so it's easier for people who are working in both communities. So there's some background, and really where this is coming from as well is a desire, what you're seeing provincially and is expressed by council and municipalities, is to try and streamline our processes so that they are transparent and consistent and fair, but also as timely as possible, particularly when it comes to housing development as part of the legislation and the things that we're seeing from the province. Really, it's province-wide, trying to remove roadblocks where it's possible and still have a good public process. So the report, remember I have some slides. The report essentially goes through some of the background, and generally this is something that is really commonly contained in these types of bylaws, the development application procedures. Commonly they contain information on generally the processes and sequence for different types of applications, and the information requirements that applicants need to provide that allows the analysis and sort of informed decision making that a council will make. So that includes things like the authority to require development approval information. That's the technical term. So there is, and the report gets into it a bit, within the official community plan bylaw, it kind of sets the stage by saying, yes, Ucluelet is defined as a development approval information area, and then the details are in this procedural bylaw. So there's some of that in our existing bylaw, but as I said, it's a few years old, and we sort of point to, like in the Tofino example, it's a lengthy list, and of course at times some of those Rarely are all of those engaged in any application because applications come in all different sort of shapes and sizes, but it's there to certainly enable the collection or gathering of that information when it's needed to inform the decision making. Other information requirements like the development permit guidelines, terms of reference for things like the reports that we receive. For example, like the qualified environmental professional, which is the term that's used for, generally it's for our environmental development permit areas, it's biologists who are weighing in. There's the reference in sort of the procedural bylaw to enable the gathering of that information. But it does work hand in hand with, like, in this case, the official community plan bylaw has the development permit area guidelines, which covers some of that as well as sort of what's required, say for like a stream side development that is going through an environmental DP process. It lists some of the information, but this application procedures bylaw can essentially get into some more detail of that. Also, another area that's covered is like notification, and that's an area where there's some, sort of differences or preferences in communities on when and how notification is given for different types of applications. There are some minimums that are required by legislation for things like public hearings and variances and stuff like that, but those are minimums, and some communities decide to go further, and there's sort of a balance of cost, time, resources to what's the kind of right level of making the community aware, and in every community it's a little different sort of how they strike that balance. Similarly, public input and public information meetings, again, there are components of that are required by legislation, but then others, like the public information meeting, is an optional thing. It's generally outside of the municipal process. It's more of an open house where developers can be encouraged to sort of hold a session to inform people early on. So we're looking to get some feedback on how far and sort of what's the right fit for that. And then also in the bylaw, things like setting out the basis for requiring security deposits when there are things like landscaping and that's going to affect the public side of a development. Or the other one is around if there's things like replanting around an environmentally sensitive area, or when there's revegetation and things like that going on.
Could you speak up just a little bit?
Okay, sorry, I was told I didn't need to be as close to this microphone. I'll do my best. The report also touches on monitoring and how far do we go. That could be embraced in the bylaw or defined in the bylaw, and then also getting into areas of delegated authority, which I'll speak to a bit in detail. And so currently, and so on delegated authority, I should mention a couple of things. There are some things that council is responsible for, and you cannot delegate. And generally, the adoption of bylaws is council's responsibility and authority. That can't be handed to staff or to another body. So OCP, zoning amendments, those are all going to be at the council table. And then any time there's an appeal of a decision that's adjudicated, if council delegates the authority to issue a permit, if there's an appeal of that, you can't delegate the appeal process as well. So it basically comes back to council, which is a sort of a common process. And then it's worth mentioning there are some things already where authority already sort of rests with others, such as like the Board of Variance is an example, where if you have a zoning bylaw, you must appoint a Board of Variance, and the decisions on those variances is made by that appointed board. Council makes the appointments, but doesn't make the sort of day-to-day decisions. Subdivision, again, not the responsibility of council, but of the approving officer who's appointed. Building permits, you have a building bylaw, which is established by council, and then the permits are issued by staff. It really, does it meet code? And if so, permits are issued. And business licensing, again, as long as it's following the regulations, then business licenses are processed at the staff level. With the exception, as council will be aware, we have a perhaps unique and interesting exception in our business licensing bylaw, where mobile vending business licenses specifically come back in front of council. So really the process here, the report was to provide some background here, and we have a number of questions. The hope is to simply get input from council on some of the directions of how these individual areas could be tackled, so that we could go back and then prepare a draft of a new procedures bylaw to bring for council to consider and discuss at a later date. But some input early on will help sort of shape what that bylaw would look like. So Mr. Rotenberg has, and the report goes through a number of sort of questions and areas to discuss. And Mr. Rotenberg has some sort of draft motions that he can share. And he was able to unshare my screen. Okay. I don't know if I have to stop sharing.
Does council have any questions for Mr. Gregg to this point? Okay.
So I think really it's the questions that are in the report that Mr. Rotenberg is prepared, so we can have them on the screen for any sort of discussion or wording, because we're hoping to get some motions from council that will then provide the direction for drafting this thing.
So the way these upcoming slides work is we break down the questions and then we have a corresponding motion. We can certainly update the motion to whatever council likes. We just thought it would be a convenient way to go through the questions. So here's the first slide.
All right, so the question is council interested in delegating some or all of the possible permit approvals to staff? Looking for feedback. Councillor Mafty?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on this. I had a fairly detailed discussion with Mr. Lawrence, our CAO, about these issues. And my understanding was that it would streamline the process overall. That's my impression. So I'm in support of that. I understand that anyone who would put in an application and might want to appeal would then have the opportunity to do so, at which point it would come before council, which addresses one of the concerns that I have. I was worried that at the end of the day, people in the community want to feel like the council is representing them, and that if the council's weighing in on these issues, they're getting an answer that reflects council's interpretation of what the community wants rather than the district. As long as that check is in there, I'm okay supporting something that's going to streamline the process and that's going to make things more efficient. So in that regard, I'd say yes, I'd be interested in delegating some or all of the possible permit approvals to staff.
Thank you, Councillor Mafty. Can I hear from other councillors? Councillor Kennington?
I am, of course, in favor of streamlining the process, just as long as there's, some kind of transparency with council on where developments are with these things. Because if they're not, if they have no oversight from us, we don't know how long these things are in the process or in the queue. And I think there's a later question that I would have further input on that.
So some sort of tracking software that could inform us as to where projects we're at.
Just a way to know, so it's not a closed box. What's going on and where each of these applicants are in the process. So, yes. And at this time, I mean, council's been fairly involved, maybe too involved in some instances, but we don't know, next council or the council after that. We have to also consider where they're going to be in their journey of understanding development processes, whereas we've been very, very into it. Maybe the next council won't be, so we need to make sure we're not setting it up for failure down the line as well. So.
Good point. Councillor Anderson?
I think I agree with what I'm hearing here. I also think that there has to be maybe a level of transparency that that we don't currently have, which was on that list of avenues for public notification. The last one, I guess it was the first and last, we don't have, like the signs posted, and the last one was the municipal website real-time permit status tracker. I thought that would be a great idea if we could do something like that. That keeps us out of the dark on that one. But other than that, yeah, I'm also all for streamlining the process, and as long as there was a way for the public to cycle back or circle back to us in case there was a roadblock that they hit, which I think is built into this.
I think if they appeal, it would come to before us.
Right.
Yeah.
It would almost make sense to have an automatic appeals process. Like, if it doesn't get approved, it automatically goes for appeal, and so that, you know, a development doesn't come and go without us ever knowing that it was presented and failed, because we would need to find out why. And,
Right.
And I think that comes later in these questions.
There is, I think, yeah. There's a part about having an incomplete package or something, which
Yeah.
could be like, yeah.
Does that give you enough information to go on, Mr. Gregg?
I think that's certainly, yes, very helpful. And I'd say two things. Yes, the question comes up a little later, specifically around, you know, is there a decision and then appeal if the decision is no, or rather, I think it could be set up where it's just staff are essentially delegated the ability to approve permits, and it's like, well, we can't approve this thing, or it's not complete, or whatever, and it just automatically comes to council. That's definitely something that could be in there.
In addition to that, I would be curious if there would be a mechanism to, if a proposal is just ongoing, it's not necessarily denied or approved. It would never come to appeal. So a certain time limit on how long a developer has before it automatically triggers, you know, a question to council over should we proceed with this or not? Because sometimes these things can go on for extended periods of time, and time is money.
Good point. Mr. Rotenberg, did that give you enough information to...
What do you think?
through the mayor. I think the second part, and I think council a motion would be helpful, is really that it sounds like there's some interest in delegating permits to staff. I mean, that's definitely the direction in the DAPR report, and is to try and streamline things, which really then leans on ensuring that the guidelines are doing what you want them to do. You know, if the guidelines really describe what is the development that the town wants to see, well, then that's what sort of forms the decision on the individual permits. But really, I think a motion would be helpful on what type of permits. So, the sort of things that the province has given council and municipalities a little more ability to delegate permits. Variances weren't possible not so long ago, but now minor development variance permits could be delegated to staff. That could be broad, or it could be in specific cases. Temporary use permits, form and character development permits, environmental development permits. Those are kind of the obvious list of ones that you see on your council agenda. Some of them are very straightforward, and it would certainly, the whole streamlining part, really, it frees up time and space on council agendas if you're comfortable that things like environmental development permits or some of these minor things are handled, you know, quicker at the staff level and aren't taking the time to come onto a council agenda. But I think a motion sort of, or some discussion specifically about which or all, that's.
I think any decisions that are based on reports that come in from QEPs, engineers, geotech, all of those things, those are all professional services that, you know, we're not equipped, not all of us, all the time to make decisions that are contrary to those reports. So anytime one of these reports come in, I mean, that's all we need is the fact that there's a roadmap to doing it right. I don't know that we necessarily need to have input on that, but then more subjective things like form and character, I think that needs sort of more input, because anybody who had any kind of form or character bias, if it's one person that just doesn't like the way something looks, like that's pretty subjective, and I would hate for that to sort of limit the vision and creativity of certain developments to move forward. So I'd like to see things like that in the form of or handled by a panel.
Yes, so remove the form and character development permits from that list.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Through the mayor, could I ask a question? Just for clarification of a panel of what the intent is there.
The intent is to have more than one person deciding what the town looks like physically, as far as architecture, landscape, and all of that. I think that's more of a communal decision than one person's vision for what it is, because it is so subjective.
I think the idea of a panel comes up later in the questions, doesn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
It does, but maybe just we'll hover on this for a second, because this is really helpful for crafting, this bylaw and then what some other pieces may be. So the guidelines that define the kind of the rule book are adopted by council with community input. Then the decision of, does this meet the guidelines? Obviously, there's always some subjective, well, how far, and you're weighing a number of things and sort of going, oh, okay, overall. If there's ever any question, or it's potentially controversial, they can be elevated to council for making that decision. It's really, if the panel that's mentioned, later in the report is, if we routinely have staff looking at it, so like various departments say, almost on all applications, provide input, and the reports you see are really in a compilation of engineering and fire and, parks giving input on different development applications. But we could have a process which would be more streamlined than writing reports to council meetings, but really involve input from different people at the staff level. The other piece that some communities have are things like design review panels or advisory planning commissions. That's a bit of a different question and has very different implications for time, cost, and resources. So I just want to get clarity on which path is the preference, because they do mean very different things.
Tofino has a design review panel, so we could model it after that.
I was sort of assuming it would mean what you said originally, like fire and bylaw and planning.
So what was written in the report, and one of the suggestions is having essentially the development team, which is someone from those different departments at the staff level. It's within council's ability to set up an advisory planning commission or design review panels, or essentially public members appointed to those, and many cities and towns will have those, and design review panels tend to have, must have an architect and a landscape architect, and various people in the development community may be appointed to that. That is a different, I think, question and a different level of resourcing that's necessary. So I just got to ask the question of, because we're trying to set up the bylaw that kind of sets the process up. So we need to know which direction is the interest of council.
Would a design review panel not slow things down, because you'd have to get those people all together in one place at one time?
Quite simply, yes. That if you go to the city of Victoria and you make an application, you're going through neighborhood review panels, design review panels, advisory planning commission before getting into a planning and development committee of council. It's a much longer kind of process because one follows the other. But it's got to be, every community has a different balance of what's that interest in public input on the decision, as opposed to, are we comfortable that our OCP and other bylaws say what the community wants, and then we're trying to move them with less process, less red tape.
I think those things can happen in parallel. I mean, no matter who's doing it, if it's like staff that are doing it versus the panels doing it, either staff's doing it or the panel's doing it, I don't think it adds any time to it at all. And having been through that process in Tofino, it didn't seem to cause any road bumps.
How long did it take for the design review panel to get the information and make a decision?
About a week, but it was happening in parallel to engineering drawings and everything else. It was just kind of and the level of application that went in was literally like just some 3D models of what this might look like, and that was enough, and that happened during the conceptual stage. So it actually helped, because by the time it went for planning review, we already knew it was going to pass what it looked like, and you don't spend a ton of money doing that. You figure out what it's going to look like, you present it. If you get the okay, then it goes on to that next review, and it doesn't get held up there and sent back to the beginning again to start over. So it actually does streamline the process a little bit.
Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think your original point there was just to get more eyes on that form and character, which is, and I guess I'm out of my lane somewhat here, but I would think that to take away that element of subjectivity that you talked about wouldn't be a bad thing. I'm trying to think, it would be like you would have someone in charge of form and character that didn't like rectangle windows or something, and then and then next thing you know, there's no rectangle windows in town. It sounds like a silly example, but at the end of the day, it sounds slightly more democratic to get more than one person just looking at that forming character. But I don't necessarily think it has to be like like a heritage kind of group or something like that. It just has to be, hey, we're gonna do the forming character instead of one person saying yes or no. A quick meeting, just 3 sets of eyes on it, whatever.
To be fair, I've never seen a report come in front of council where they were like, ugh, and we've seen just about everything. So I'm just kind of looking down the road here. Currently it's pretty open to all styles. That's today, maybe not tomorrow. It depends who's sitting or at the table, right?
Right.
So we've taken out the form and character development permits from the list. So is council satisfied with the motion that's on the screen?
Yeah, I can move that.
I can, yeah.
Okay. If someone would like to move that.
I'll move the council direct staff to prepare a draft development approval bylaw which delegates approval of the following permits to staff: minor development variance permits, temporary use permits, and environmental development permits.
I'll second that.
Councillor Kennington seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries.
Favor.
Thank you. So the next question is, would council prefer that the applications be approved or rejected by staff with a process to appeal such decisions to council?
I like,
Mr. Gregg?
I'll let council discuss first, but
I'm for number 2. What I was sort of alluding to earlier of automatic elevation.
So number 2, that the application be approved by staff or else elevated to council for the decision to approve or reject. So if staff is not approving, it comes to council.
Mm-hmm.
How does the rest of council feel about that?
I'll just chime in here. I would lean towards the second option of having council automatically be a part of the process, simply because I think it's important for people to feel like council is the final authority, and it also keeps what I think is an important distance between council and district staff. And my worry would be that we get to a point where there's a perception that district staff are making these decisions independently. And I'm not saying that because, I have any reason to lack faith in staff, but I think it's important that we maintain the right image and the right perception in the community. I think I'd be okay with having a really clear appeal process, but I guess what I'm saying is I could go either way, but personally I'm leaning towards the second choice of having issues elevated to council for the final yes or no stamp on it. My concern with that is that it might not streamline the process as much as we're hoping if everything is still coming before council. So I'd be interested to hear what other folks are saying. This was sort of the crux of what I ended up speaking to Mr. Lawrence about when we were meeting in person. So I'm curious what other people say too.
Well, Councillor Kennington just agreed with you, so we'll look to Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I'm up for number 2 as well.
Okay. Looks like number 2 is the winner here.
through the mayor, I would just say at the staff level, that would be my recommendation, is to essentially say if there's something that's like, oh, this is clear, it's clear cut, no brainer, we can speed this along. But if it's like, this may be controversial, or it's missing information and the applicant just is continually failing to provide what they need to, then it goes to council. And so I think that's very workable.
Okay, great. So I think there's a resolution there that can be read.
I'm having trouble connecting number 2 to an actual motion, but
It's on the screen, I think.
oh, up there, look at that. I'll move that council direct staff to prepare a draft bylaw development approval bylaw where applications are approved by staff or else elevated to council for consideration.
Thank
I'll
you.
second.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Kennington, seconded by Councillor Mafty. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed. That carries. Next question. Would review by a staff panel be preferred by council? So this is that staff panel versus design review panel?
Yeah, I guess what I was getting at the other one was that that one that we extracted from number 1 would be part of this.
The form and character development permit.
So
And would it be a staff panel or a design review panel?
that's a good question. It would be nice to have at least one outside person on that panel, whether it's a councillor or a member of the public or how, does any of that make sense?
Well,
What would you say to that?
So through the mayor, procedurally, if you're doing a design review panel, essentially it's going to be an appointed committee by council. You now have agendas, minutes, the applicant having ability to address the committee. It creates a structure. We need to have a discussion about the time, the money, the capacity within the organization to create that. I mean, committees take time and money to run them, to give advice, and that can be very valuable, but that needs to be an informed decision. What this was sort of anticipating is council delegating the authority generally is to a position. That could be to the CAO, to a director, or essentially that it's delegated to one person needs to sign the permit essentially, and that but to have a structure there where that person's decision is informed by a regular check-in with a larger group is something that doesn't add all that necessarily overhead in the process, but just sort of ensures that it's not like, oh, Bert is always the one that the permits go to, and it's just landing on one desk, if that makes sense.
So the way these questions were structured, if the last one, C, went first, that would have changed the way I felt about A. So given the fact that we voted on number 2, that now kind of alleviates some of the concern of the form and character, so that one can actually go back into number 1 and be re-included in the delegation, if that makes sense. Sorry, Joey. You know what I'm saying?
I think I followed that. And remember, this is all input so that we can go draft a bylaw, and the raw draft will come to council for consideration of first reading. And if we don't get it right, we can adjust. It's just we're looking for, obviously there's a lot of different paths this could go, and we're trying to get the right flavor.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't follow what you were saying. Sorry.
What I was saying is that I wouldn't have suggested removing form and character if I had known which way the last vote was going to go as far as 1 or 2 about elevating it to council. So if we had voted to not elevate it to council and the form and character was denied, we wouldn't have seen it, and it would just be delegated, and that would be it. Unless they chose to appeal, which is...
I kind of liked the idea of removing form and character from number 2.
Great, I'm glad to hear it. I just didn't want to, muddy the waters here, but I see the merits of both. But
This is like a choose your own adventure book. You work backwards and just
like,
start at the end and work back.
Work backwards.
Yeah, just jump around to whatever makes sense. The last thing I want to do is hold up an application, so I'm just trying to see a way forward that's transparent, where things move smoothly, where there's accountability and transparency, and how we get there, I guess, is what this discussion's about. I would hate to see an overly complicated design review process that does hinder it. So if there's a way that we can actually streamline that process and make it simple, I'm not sure how we would do that.
Does a staff panel that you describe here, that's not the same as the committee that you're talking about? This is just an in-house, get a few other eyes on it. Yeah, so how about that we go with what we've already done, but we say that we add this part in just for the form and character aspect of the permit process.
That would work for me.
Does that make sense?
Move it.
You write that up, Joey.
Through the mayor, and maybe this is adding another question, but currently there is a delegated authority within our development approval, procedures bylaw that talks about minor development permits, and it's kind of weird because it's a dollar value. I mean, that's where do you draw that line? And I'm not sure that a dollar value necessarily is going to be the thing, because there's things that may not cost a lot but would have a huge impact on the form and character, and other things maybe millions of dollars and blend right in. So. But maybe there is a better way of or coming up with a definition, and if council is more comfortable saying, well, okay, if we can define what is minor, those things could be handled in one process, but if something is more major of interest, it can automatically come to council for that decision. So it doesn't necessarily have to be sort of all or nothing, I guess is what I'm saying.
How would you word that?
Other than $75,000 or less is minor. I think we would give us a chance to draft it and come back. I think that it could be some language around, visibility, impact on the community, because you can imagine something that's right on the most prominent street corner in town could be a small thing and is going to have a big impact, whereas something just in a different location would be is someone going to notice as they go by and do a double take or not? I mean, that literally was the litmus test for a former colleague of mine, and she was like, okay, delegated, if a council member is going to drive by and do a double take, where did that come from? Then that should go to council for approval. But if it kind of blends in and the sense of staff is like, no, this fits, when fits with the guidelines that have been adopted by council, then that's something that probably there's comfort with issuing the permit. Makes sense.
So are we comfortable with the motion that's on the screen?
So just to be clear, this motion is effective, it's saying effectively, if form and character development, then staff panel. I'm not sure that's exactly what you guys are getting at here, because I think that Bruce is also looking for this other question, which is if staff have the authority to issue the development permit of whatever type, whether it's a TUP or a minor DVP, should it be considered by a panel or should it be considered by an individual? So I think this question initially was baked to address how do we make this decision on all of those 4 items. So initially it was development variance permits, temporary use permits, environment development permits, and now form and character permits have been removed here. But now it seems that this resolution is kind of morphed into only addressing the form and character DPs, and I just want to make sure that's council's intent.
Yes.
I think so.
And I guess the next question would be, what's council's intent with the other items? So minor development variance permits, temporary use permits, and environmental development permits.
I don't think those need a panel. They can just be delegated to staff.
And when you say a panel, we're talking about a panel of staff?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay.
Okay, so for D, there is a motion on the screen. Councillor Mafty, did you have anything to say about this one?
No, I'm following everything. It makes sense to me. I'm not necessarily sure that I would have gotten quite as hung up on the form and character aspect of it all, but I'm okay with the motion here, and I think it makes sense.
Great. Would someone like to move it?
As long as my mic's on, I can go right ahead.
You're on.
I'll move that council direct staff to prepare draft development approval bylaw, which requires a panel to review form and character development permits.
I'll second that.
Councillor Kennington seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Okay, next one. This is the fifth one. Does council consider developer-led public information meetings a useful part of the process? I would say yes.
And through the mayor, perhaps it's sort of like maybe the wording of that. It's sort of like what is the proper role of the public information meeting, and really maybe it's getting to the second question at what scale, because really it's outside of the formal approval process. It's being held by the developer. They're bringing their comments that they hear forward. It is, I'd say, on larger applications, and certainly ones that are sort of looking a little further out in a timeline, can be very, very useful, and certainly for raising awareness of an application and gathering input that starts to form that. But there's probably a point at which smaller things come forward that never had a public information meeting, and I guess we're looking for some feedback on what types, what you've seen that you thought, oh, that would have benefited from, or oh, that seemed like overkill to go to a public information meeting. We're just trying to gauge that.
I've been pretty happy with the public information meetings that we've had for those larger developments, and it's actually has affected the developer to go back to the drawing board in a few instances. So I don't know, like I wouldn't put a dollar value on it or anything, but just the larger projects I think are very useful to have a public information meeting.
We're not talking about mandating this, though, are we? Because it's to the developer's benefit to hold one of these meetings. Like, if they don't want to do it, it's at their own peril.
Through the mayor, essentially, if you look at the Tofino bylaw, it's an example where it's part of the process. It's listed in the bylaw. It's helpful to have. I mean, the bylaw itself is a bit of a guide in that you have applicants. They're looking at it and say, okay, what's required? What are all the things I'm going to have to go through? And sort of kind of lays out the roadmap for it. So it's useful if there's an expectation of like, okay, this is when we'd like to see one happen. If we can define what's that, right? So larger, yes. How large sort of gets to that scale, that's a hard one to say. One of the questions I think that's going to come up as a little down the road as the community is talking about things like housing, zoning, infill of small-scale multi-unit housing options and things like that. And those are options to consider. And along with that process is, okay, what is it the same process for something that is 4 units versus 400? Arguably not, but where does that sort of fall? So having that in the bylaw is actually useful for someone who's looking I'm looking at Euclid, I'm thinking of investing, or I own land and now I'm wondering what I can do with it. What are all the steps I have to take? The bylaw itself is a helpful tool that way.
So it outlines that a public information meeting is an option to the developer, but they don't necessarily have to hold one. And nowhere in there does it say a development of this size must have one or anything like that.
And as you said, like there are times when I've seen a development that comes forward that they haven't held a public information meeting and they get the feedback like, oh, gee, it's too bad. So that's if there's a sense of what starts to trigger that, I think it would be helpful guidance, because helpful to have that sense from council, because obviously we get questions from applicants as well as around the, okay, public information meeting, what do you think we should do? And that's, we want to be helpful and provide some guidance, but again, it's trying to reflect what really is the community desire.
I would just go with status quo. Whatever's been done recently is fine with me. Anyone have any other ideas?
The only thing I'm wondering about is things that would typically require a public hearing, maybe would automatically trigger that information so people are informed going into those public hearings so they don't turn into just a misinformation session or whatever it is. So, but going forward, what is going to require a public hearing? Well, it's going to be changes to the OCP and rezonings, correct?
Through the mayor, would be changes to the OCP bylaws still require a public hearing, or if there's a zoning amendment that is not for residential, but like just commercial development or industrial, those would still have a public hearing. But anything that is for housing, or at least the majority of the property, or the development is for housing, those are, as council knows, now we're prohibited from holding a public hearing. So
So would you see one of these open houses, could you see those turning into public hearings in a way?
through the mayor, we'd have to be really careful to avoid that. As Mr. Rotenberg, I think, would back up, that that the district has to be, and there's been a lot of legal advice lately around avoiding having a quasi-public hearing. Now, the open house or the public information meeting is usually early in the process. And ideally, they're an opportunity for a developer to get feedback from the community, which can actually inform the design of the project, as opposed to here it is and in it goes. But it can also be just a raising awareness. This is what we're applying for. And so people know and are more informed and have a chance to kind of one-on-one ask questions and see things up close. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but it's a, you know, there may not be a line that says, okay, you have 17 units and you're over the line of 16, so therefore you have to have a public information meeting. And I think we can operate with what has been the status quo of kind of that sense of, okay, if it's larger, really encouraging the developer to do that. What's really helpful in the bylaw also is it just sort of sets the framework of how to do it. So things like advertise it well in advance, check in with staff to make sure that, you know, it's not on the same time as a council meeting, so it's conflicting, and make sure it's held in a neutral public place like the UCC, so everyone's welcome and feels comfortable, you know, attending, and then give any sort of feedback they capture. They're supposed to provide that with their application so that we see it, but really it's up to them to do that. But the bylaw can kind of set the framework for that.
Yeah, this is such an open-ended question. I don't think we need to fill in A, B, C, and D.
That's totally fair.
Does that make sense to council?
Yeah, at this point, the only thing I would think that, you know, if they were looking to do an OCP amendment, then maybe that would definitely trigger it. But then it comes down to it, you know, if we're talking about adding an ADU to a certain place, are you really going to have a public open house for a simple structure? So where is that line? What makes sense? And do we just need to attach a number to it, like lots over a certain size, or yeah?
Yeah, we just had
If I can,
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Councillor Mafty.
I'm a little bit confused because in my mind there's a significant difference between a public hearing and a public information session, and I think the public hearings that are going to happen no matter what, I'm happy with that. I think there's a huge value to public information sessions. I don't think that they should be mandated though, and I agree with the previous point. That, you know, if a developer wants to come in and propose something, it would be their mistake not to engage the public. Having said that, I feel like the two extremes that are never good are a contentious proposal that sort of poisons the public's mind and they get it into their head that this is bad news no matter what, or a developer coming in and kind of playing the town and saying, oh, we know what you want, we're going to give it to you, it's going to be so great, you're going to love us, and then it's the bait and switch. So at any rate, I don't think it's up to us to mandate that. And so if a developer wants to submit an application and go through the whole process without the benefit of a public information session, that's up to them. I think it might work against them, but that's their choice to make. As far as public hearings that we're gonna have no matter what. Like I'm not necessarily sure that I'm clear as to why these two things are being conflated right now.
Yeah, I agree. We had a public hearing today, for example, and that developer did not hold a public information meeting at their choice. And so that's why I don't.
Nor did they even come to the nor did they come to the public hearing. So those
True.
two things should remain separate, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I really don't think we need to fill in A, B, C, and D. I think just leave it status quo.
I agree with that.
How does
I
that
agree.
sound? Okay, perfect. So do we even need a motion, Mr. Rotenberg? No. Okay. All right. The next category is notification signs.
Through the mayor, and we wanted to prompt a little bit of discussion on the signs because it's a common tool, and it's kind of the when and right sizing of it. We don't have a sign shop on the West Coast, so that makes some of the things a bit onerous. And I think that's something actually Tofino has learned with their new bylaw. I was like, ooh, that's not working so well. But you see, like in I think like City of Surrey, you'll have every site that has a development, and it's common with a lot of municipalities, larger and urban municipalities, they'll have a development sign that has, okay, here's a map or image of what's being proposed, details, it's printed on an aluminum sign, and contact information for more information. Those take time and money for the applicants to put up, and so our bylaw currently does mention signage, but gives some discretion of, well, when is that necessary? So we're sort of looking to right size this if there's, and see, I guess, first of all, is there an interest in, or does council feel that a sign is something that benefits the community to see, oh, that property sort of gets their attention, something is up, and then how far do we go and what sort of detail? Because a more generic, there's a development happening, go see the website or go see City Hall and you'll learn more, is one thing. But if it's like, oh, a lot of detail, that just it takes more in terms of resources to get those up. So I guess we're sort of starting with, is that something that is of interest, and we'll try and sort of see what makes the right size.
I think like a generalized sign that can be used multiple times, so we're not wasting paper and throwing these things out. It could be as simple as a QR code or directions for a phone number and a website. Like you go here and it'll take you to all the proposals that are in front of us. The sign essentially gets people's attention that something's going on here. If you're interested in it, the information's there, and most people will go, but we have to make it accessible. So multiple ways of getting that information, whether it's a paper copy from the district, a QR code for, I guess everybody's got a cell phone, but maybe somebody doesn't. Just making it accessible is super important.
Yeah, I've always thought that we could use more signs at developments. Even in my last 2 terms, it's come up several times that if something is happening on the corner of Main and Peninsula, there should be a sign that says what it is. That's just my feeling. I don't know that it has to have drawings of the final product or anything, but just sort of stating what exactly is going on that construction site. Councillor Mafty, how do you feel?
I'm of 2 minds. I like the idea of signage. I like the idea of putting information out there in a proactive way. One of the complaints I've heard time and again from so many people is, how come I wasn't notified of this before? How come we always find out about these things at the last minute? How come these things happen, behind closed doors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in that regard, I think it would be a great idea. I myself would tend to lean more towards something fairly generic that wouldn't get overly specific, something that just draws people's attention saying, hey, this is a location for which an application has been put in, whether it's for a zoning amendment or a DVP or whatever, and then maybe it is a QR code, maybe it is a where you can get more information online, and that the costs can start to add up, and the logistics are not to be dismissed. So if it's possible to get specific on the sign without causing too much added expense and complexity, great. If not, something more generic that just lets people know this property is, something's happening and you'll have a chance to voice your opinion or to learn more about it. I'd support this. I'm certainly pro sign.
Yes, so am I. And it lists, it asks, should notification signs be required in cases of, and it lists several different situations, and I would say yes for all of those.
Yeah, sorry, to be clear, I'd agree with all of those. I think the question is for me anyway, is how much information can there be per sign? Because the way that I understood, there might be two options here. One is that there's a generic sign that doesn't include information, but links or directs people to a link on a website where they can look up that particular case, versus individual signs for each individual application or variance or whatever. But regardless, I think that the sign should be required. So it's just the scope of the sign that I'm not quite clear on, and I'd be okay with either.
What if it was just a sandwich board that was could be reused at different locations and just strip off the old information and put on the new information?
Through the mayor. So sometimes these have to stay up for a while because development applications say it's going through a bylaw process. So having something that's weatherproof and isn't going to blow over, or get kicked into the ditch or that sort of thing, and then someone will go, well, I didn't see the sign because it was down. So a sandwich board probably wouldn't serve that function, but I'm hearing the interest in both. The pros of the generic sign is that you can have them printed up and just kind of loan them out, take a deposit, go put it up on your property, and when you're done, bring it back, and it goes to the next one, and get more use out of it. The other thing we've seen, but there's no specifics there. So a neighbor walking by was like, well, what's happening? Something that I've used in the past was essentially we had pre-printed signs with some blanks. This is subject to a development proposal or whatever, and then we take a fat permanent marker and fill in the blanks a bit. So there was a little more information. Oh, it's a rezoning from residential to industrial or whatever, or if it's a development permit for this. And then if there's more detail that people want, then they could contact the district by various means. So that is fairly workable and not a lot of cost. And hopefully you get something that's weatherproof but also recyclable at the end of the day, and that can be tricky. But so less time and cost is because you can just write the sign and hand it to the applicant, at the counter kind of thing.
Yeah, I like that idea.
As opposed to custom printed signs, which are
That's a nice sort of in between generic and customized. That's kind of in the middle of those two things.
okay.
Yeah,
That's helpful.
yeah. What do the rest of council think?
Yeah, it looks like Tofino has it in their development application process that they have to put up signs, and it just shows where they have to put them depending on the position of the lot. And so where do they get their signs?
Port Alberni or Nanaimo. Right. So that was something that I think has come up. Is like, okay, is there an alternative that we can find that's a little quicker and less costly? Is something that I think we heard from staff in Tofino.
Are those all custom? Their signs? Like, do they do one for each?
Typically, yes. And the other thing I'd recommend, some bylaws in the bylaw will have a schedule that this is the form of the sign, and I would recommend against that, because then you're locked into it. It takes a bylaw amendment to change the sign, and it's something that I'm hearing something that's like practical and workable, but visible is kind of the desire.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, and there is a suggested motion. Do we actually have to fill in what is said on the sign? Okay, great.
I was just going to say XYZ.
All right, does someone want to make that motion?
I mean, to that end, when it includes general information about the proposal, I don't even know if we need to go there. It's just something's happening here. This is where you go to get the information, because then we can reuse the same sign over and over and over again.
No, I liked Mr. Gregg's idea of having some white spaces that with a felt pen you can actually just fill it in.
But he said permanent, and then it's permanent.
Would it be permanent?
Through the mayor, ideally, we want to find something that is not too expensive, and it may be that, and it's something I think we'd look and see. Okay, can we get a half a dozen made up from the aluminum signs printed that would have a white space that could you put a permanent marker on it so it'll stand up in the weather, but then with some solvent wipe it off and reuse it. That would be, I think, an excellent approach that we look into. This one-off printed signs seem wasteful. And the one thing we want to avoid is the foam board, which isn't recyclable.
So how about we just say reusable? And then the information.
I think that's a good goal.
However you get the information on there, as long as we can reuse it some other way.
Carved wood signs that compost.
Gold leaf.
So add in the word reusable at the top. Is that good? Yeah. Does that sound good to everybody? Does someone want to make that motion?
I will move that council direct staff to prepare a draft development approval bylaw, which requires reusable notification signs to be posted for the following proposed developments: OCP and zoning bylaw amendments, development variance permits, temporary use permits, form and character permits, and includes general information about the proposal and where additional information can be found.
Thank you, Councillor Kennington. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
I'll second.
Give it to Mark.
Okay, Councillor Mafty gets it. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. And our next category is print notification.
I would just add through the mayor that the ads that people will see in the Westerly, they're essentially for those types of applications where there's a statutory requirement for us to advertise, and such as giving notice of first hearing or of a public hearing or that sort of thing. So, but we thought we would ask if there's a desire to use more of that, and just noting that it is costly, that does add a little bit of time and cost to an application. But we need to ask, but then also the other question is around like digital tools and whether things like temporary use permits, environmental development permits, whether those are things that council wants to see broadcast or notified in different ways.
Thoughts?
The only problem I see with the printed newspaper ads is that there's been many times where it's like, oh, you missed the deadline, now we got to wait another 2 weeks. So that's 2 weeks, right? Where people potentially have millions on the line, borrowed, paying interest on, waiting for 2 weeks just for a newspaper ad. If there's any way we can make that instantaneous as opposed to waiting.
Well, I think the Westerly has an online version.
And through the mayor, for the statutory notification, we have requirements we have to stick to, where it has to be in 2 publications, so many days apart and whatnot. We know their deadlines and whenever possible, and how the days, the Wednesdays and the print align with council meetings. Sometimes it's possible where we have the notification ready ahead of time, and if council approves something and sends it to a public hearing, then that evening or the next morning the ad's going to the Westerly, or they may already have it and we're giving them the green light to print. Essentially, that's as fast as we can go, really. But yes, sometimes it just isn't possible with all the volume of applications and whatnot. So, but I guess the question, so that I don't see that we can't accelerate that a whole lot, but
Then leave it, because it's an accessibility thing again, and a lot of people do read the paper.
yes, and we hear that as well, and those are required. There isn't really the option to say, don't give notice of a public hearing. But if there were an interest, we're just asking if there's a desire to see, other types of permits that aren't required, but optionally could, in Ucluelet, be using the Westerly as a way of notifying people that, hey, something's happening on this property. That's just the question we got to ask.
I would say no, myself.
Only where required.
Only when required, yeah. So we don't need a motion for that, correct? We do? Oh, okay, good. All right. The digital notification opportunities. Yuki Mail, social media, dedicated web page. So would council like to see development application notifications expanded beyond the required statutory notifications?
I just, through the mayor, the notifications are usually tied to applications where there is an opportunity for public input as part of the process. So a variance, say. There are things that don't include that. Development permits is the prime example, where the public hearing has happened when council was considering adopting the guidelines for those DPs in the official community plan, or it could be in a zoning bylaw, but those, then the permit itself does not require an opportunity for public input. So those aren't typically advertised, but that's just sort of seeing, like, in terms of the sort of transparency and awareness out there, it's really what is the desire that council sees or meets the community need.
I think it's been working fine the way it is.
Yeah, the information's out there on the district website for major developments and Yuki Mail. If people want to be in the know, they can simply sign up for those existing avenues.
So I don't think we need it notifications expanded beyond the required statutory notifications. You okay with that, Councillor Mafty?
I am okay with that. Yeah, I think this is fine. I'm happy with this for sure.
Okay, so again, we don't need a motion. The next one is alignment with our neighbor. Mr. Gregg?
And again, through the mayor, in the appendices to the report here, our existing bylaw, it runs 12 pages. Tofino's quite new bylaw is about 25 pages. Wherever possible, it really makes sense for us, particularly with the development rules, bylaws, building bylaw, that zoning. We do look and see, okay, is this similar? Because there are many builders, developers, residents of the West Coast who are operating in both communities. So if things can be as similar as we can make them, then it just makes sense and helps everyone. That said, the Tofino bylaw, there's some repetition in there. I think there's sort of a very parallel but streamlined version as possible. But we're putting the question out there for council. So those two values, where you'd land.
So would council see advantage in aiming to create a more streamlined bylaw, or would it be more important to be closer aligned with the Tofino procedures?
I'm of two minds of that. I changed my mind when you said what you said. So it makes sense from a developer standpoint and people who are operating in both towns for it to be consistent across the board, because, you know, people say, oh, it's easier here than there, or easier there than here, whatever. But then I also see that it's such a different town, so if it's tailored to sort of the way they're doing things, it might not really fit what we're trying to do. We seem to be more housing focused, less commercial tourism focused as Tofino. So I'm wondering if that alignment would sort of not work. Thoughts?
Other thoughts?
Oh, it's funny. I read through both of them, but I didn't think to sort of compare and contrast them and see what the difference is. That Tofino one, like, I can't think of the differences, but I'm just thinking to myself, if it makes it easier, whatever makes it easier for the applicant, because I know that there has been tough times for applicants that, you know, they have to ask a lot of questions. If having a slightly more comprehensive application process might be easier for people to have a more complete package when they do apply, then that makes sense. But realistically, I like the idea of being streamlined. I mean, there's no question. But maybe you can answer that question. Do you think those extra like 17 pages or whatever, is that in the benefit of having a more complete package at the end of the day from the proponent?
Through the mayor, I think we can streamline it, and there is some repetition there's a whole bunch of schedules that talk about, for this type of application you need A through M, and most of those are the same for all application types. So it may be, okay, all applications need A through M, and then you don't need to repeat it for 12 pages. Things like that, I think we could kind of tighten it up. And there are a couple of things where, big resort plans are kind of anticipated in their bylaw. I think it could be a little more tailored to what we're seeing. The other thing is that the bylaw is one piece. And so it's there. It is the sort of regulatory framework and kind of sets things up. But there's also information. There's policies of council. But also there's just information, guidelines. We have a checklist for development applicants. That kind of information can be, comprehensive and quite, that's a whole different, but part of the package of if someone's looking to apply or starting out, yes, they should read the bylaw for the actual legal requirements, but there's also a lot more helpful information that can kind of step them through the process.
I would love for it to be easier to do it here than Tofino. So that would mean
That means streamlined.
Yeah, our own process is tailored to our needs, as opposed to adding all these things just for the sake of being aligned with what they're doing, when really we're two completely different kinds of towns.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I agree. Councillor Mafty, how do you feel about the aligning with Tofino?
Sorry, I was unmuted and then I muted myself. To be blunt, this isn't one that I have. It doesn't really seem that important to me. The only point that really struck a chord with me was the idea that if we can make ours easier, but I would assume that we'd be doing what's best for us regardless. So I don't necessarily see that there's any specific advantage to trying to, coordinate with Tofino. But whatever staff thinks is going to be easiest for them, I'm going to support it. I don't have a strong feeling beyond that.
Yeah, I agree. I think more streamlined as opposed to aligning with Tofino would be better. So I don't think we need a motion for that either. And the last question is, does council have other direction for staff?
There's one thing I noticed in the development application guidelines. There's a section of reports you need, and then there's a really long section of reports you may need. And that always seemed a little strange to me, that there's so much that you may need. So an applicant who's looking at our application process is looking at, well, what do I need? And there has to be a way for someone to come in and say, can I get a list of what I actually need, like as soon as possible, as opposed to now you need this, and now you need that, and now you need this. And I think it would be important, or a great way to streamline the process, to have a mechanism where they can come in, what piece of land they're using, you kind of have an idea of what they're doing. These are the reports, and we won't ask you for any more beyond these. It's a little bit of assurance, and it helps them get a complete package to you, because even for myself, I don't know what a complete package looks like, because it's different on every single piece of land that I work on.
Is that possible, Mr. Gregg?
Through the mayor, Councillor Kennington's absolutely right that every application is different, because every site is different. Every building program is a little different. So that's why it tends to be a laundry list of information that could be required. And then it's like, okay, what fits? And we get those questions daily and constantly. We're sitting down with people and saying, okay, I'm looking at this property and I want to understand what the zoning says and what's the process and what am I going to need to apply? That's part of what I think every planning office in the province does, or in the country. The question of, could you have a list where it's like, this is what we're going to require and we're going to require nothing else? No, because there's times when you get a report you don't see, or the applicant may not know the implications of it until we see it. And so that's unfortunate, but sometimes there are things that come out and then it's like, oh, okay, we need to understand that in order to inform the decision or to meet this requirement of a bylaw. So, and that really is tricky, and it's something that in the DAPR report it gets into a bit, and some of the other work that's happening in the province around how do we get over to this hurdle, and the sometimes angst that happens with applicants of, it's difficult because you just want to have a checklist going in. I just want to know exactly what I need. And unfortunately, there's a bit of iterative because as skilled as we are, we're not mind readers, and we don't have X-ray vision to see into a site and see what's underground and all those sort of things. So there are times when there are surprises on developments. We really try to avoid them, and experienced developers will have gone through that and understand it. And sometimes it's with the sort of one-off property owner who hasn't done development before, or less experienced developers. They're the ones sometimes we're most surprised of, oh, what? I came in and I thought this would be simple. I'm just applying for a building permit. Oh, now I've learned I need a development permit. I need a biologist, and because I'm on a stream or something like that. We try to explain and educate on the process as much as we can, but to get to the question of, can we just have one shot, got it all in one, on the simplest types of applications, yes, but no applications are identical, so that's a tricky one.
Well, that seems to be where the biggest holdups occur, is the evolving list of requirements, at least from what I've heard and experienced. So if there's a place where we can streamline the process and get things moving quicker, that's one of them. So I'm not suggesting any specific solution right now, but it may be an area to look into and see, like, how can we make this part of it move a little faster. I don't know what that looks like, whether it's, having that initial meeting and saying, you definitely require these, and when you bring those back, it may trigger these. Just some way of some assurance that we will be asking you for more, so that they know they will be asked for more, and that they don't come in, they're ready to go, and they've already got their financing, and they find out that, oh, I didn't realize I was going to need more.
Through the mayor, a common part of the process for addressing that can help, it may not satisfy everyone, is to have a really robust sort of initial first of all, pre-application, sit down, what's your idea? We do that all the time where people are coming in, I'm getting an application ready, I have 1,000 questions, and so we kind of point them to all the bylaws and give them the guides and wish them well. And then they come in, and it's the sufficiency review. I'm submitting an application, I think it's complete, and okay, we go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and then you go through and say, okay, what is it missing? Or, yes, it's complete, you're in the process, we think we're going to hit a council agenda on this date. That, having a really robust review, is particularly if you have municipalities who start clocking the time of development applications in the process, that is always part of the process, because the clock doesn't start ticking until it's complete. That can be more frustrating for the less experienced developers or property owners who are coming in and haven't been through the process, because it's a long, hard road to get to complete for some sites. And we've had some recent examples of developers who are experienced, who've really struggled or have chosen not to address parts of their applications where it's just not complete. And so there's no perfect solution to it, other than we try and we understand where they're coming from and try and work with people and explain, and as we can, without knowing the details until we see them. It's kind of a hard road to hopefully get them to a road to success early. But that earlier sufficiency review, I think, can be an important part of it.
Well, you kind of answered the question then, because really what it is, it's communication through the process. And so nowhere is there like, here's the process, but we're going to do a pre-app. You come in, you're going to give us this, then we're going to look at it, and we're going to tell you what else you need at that point. And so that's that open communication walking through, because, last year we were told it's not our job to hold people's hands. And it's like, well, actually it kind of is. And in this case, this is one of those things where that's the hand holding that maybe needs to happen. Mm-hmm. And I think, I realize everybody's super busy, but not holding hands can actually create more of a backlog than actually holding people's hands for certain aspects of it.
Through the mayor, absolutely. and it's a tricky one, because sometimes there's the hand holding part of it. At the same time, it is And you'll see in some of the reviews that have happened by, you know, the work that's happening with VIU and Qualicum Beach, or with the development application process review that the province did and stuff. There's also a reminder that it's the applicant's application. They need to own the process, and it's their application to make and have some responsibility for that. We can't do it for them. That said, we try to be very helpful, particularly with someone who, it's that property owner, they're not a developer, they're not experienced, they just have a dream for what they want to do with their property, and you want to help them along. Those are the hardest ones, or we accept an application that's maybe not 100% complete because they're working on something. Almost 100% of the time comes back to bite us, but you still got to try and help people, because it's, they're trying to go through what can be a confusing, complex process if they're not steeped in it day to day. I don't know that there's a magic answer, because you can either have a real streamlined system that works for the professional developer and kind of leaves behind the local property owner who isn't familiar with it, or it's a tricky one.
Yeah, I would lean towards helping the local person with a piece of land. Like, those are our people. An outside professional developer, well, they can handle it, right? But like, my concern is with, our local community trying to get things done for their families, or the local community,
Sure.
being first in mind. And if there's a way that we can help those people through that process to do it themselves.
Absolutely, and believe me, we spend a lot of time and energy trying to do exactly that. What can be tricky, though, is that at the end of the day, when there are bylaw requirements or code requirements, or there are things that aren't optional, it's not. Sometimes we see people who, and sorry if I'm getting off topic, but the expectation is, well, you can help me. Like, can you just kind of make an exception, bend the rules? Like, something, they're laws that are adopted by council, that are adopted by the province, and we don't have authority, though some people think magically we do. We don't have a magic wand to just kind of shape things. Things like maybe delegating some of the minor things, like giving variances and stuff. So when there's a wrinkle, it can be dealt with in a more streamlined fashion. I think will actually be a really helpful tool.
And I think that was the intent of this whole discussion. So we're going to stop there, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good discussion.
All right, there are 3 bylaw items. The first bylaw item is 7.1, 5-year financial plan amendment. This report will be presented by the Director of Finance, Mr. Cadman.
There we go. Now we're on. All right. So there are 2 proposed changes to the 5-year financial plan. We'll start with the easy one first. So a few meetings ago, we were directed by staff to add $2.5 million for the paving project for Peninsula Road. So it was originally 2.4. The final contract amount came back at 2.5. So that's great. We have an extra $100,000 to put towards the project. So that was an easy one. We added 2.5 to the revenue, 2.5 to the expense, and it's pretty clean. I don't know if there's any questions on that. The second one is to fix a subtotal error in the original 5-year financial bylaw, which I can highlight. Essentially what happened is we balanced the budget. We added the $1 million per year. We added that to the property tax line and to the total budget line. There's a subtotal line. You can see the total taxes, which I'll try and highlight with my mouse. You can see where my mouse is here. So that total tax line wasn't updated with the extra million. That doesn't affect the budget nor property taxes. There's no real effect, but that is still an error and needed to be adjusted. So I apologize for that. This new bylaw has the adjustment made. So with that, the recommendation is that council give the first 3 readings to the financial plan amendment bylaw. If accepted, then we will go through a period where the public can give input, and then we will come back to the July 30th meeting for adoption.
Great, thank you. Any questions for staff? Seeing none, there is a recommendation.
I can do that. I would move that council give the first, second, and third readings to the District of Ucluelet 2024-2028 Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw number 1349, 2024.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Councillor Kennington seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. The next bylaw item is 7.2, rezoning and OCP amendment for 1061 Helen Road. We completed a public hearing on the subject bylaws earlier this meeting. And this report will be presented by the Director of Community Planning, Mr. Gregg.
Thank you. And through the mayor, really just briefly, I'd just say that this is the bylaws have come back in this part of the meeting now that you've held the public hearing to consider third reading and potentially adoption of both the OCP amendment and zoning amendment bylaws. And just also the fifth motion is that there is also, if that goes through, then a development permit as well as part of the proposal. So I just see you've seen this, you're familiar with it, and the public hearing is now closed. So I would see if there's any questions for staff.
Questions for staff?
What would be the difference in parking between what's currently allowed there and this proposed development?
Sorry, there was a motorcycle backfiring. So the difference in parking?
Yeah, how many cars? Like, assuming the build out under the current zoning, how
Right.
many vehicles? And
For-
under the proposed development, how many vehicles?
All of the uses.
Yeah.
Oh, I do a quick calculation. So for the single-family home with the accessory dwelling unit and secondary suite, that would be a total of 3 parking spaces plus 1 parking space for each of the short-term rentals, the bed and breakfast, so that would be 6 total. The parking for 6 multifamily units would be 6 as well.
It's not 1.5 for duplex.
Wait, duplex. See, the form of the buildings is that they're proposing is it's multifamily, but in a cluster essentially. So there's a duplex building and 4 singles essentially. So this is multiple family in the form of scattered buildings, if you will. So the multifamily 6-unit development would be 1.5, so it'd be 9 parking spaces because there's a averaging out there with some guest parking. $11 total would be with visitor parking and the 1.5 for multifamily. And that's actually so the single family, because the bylaw was just adopted that changed for the small scale multi-unit housing, which essentially on that cluster of housing under the single family zoning would actually remove 1 parking space and sort of streamlines it by 1 unit.
So there's a net increase in cars if we approve this.
It goes from 6 to 11. Is that correct?
Through the merit would be a net increase in the minimum number of on-site parking spaces.
The plan shows 13, I believe.
Okay, next question. The currently zoned single family, and we have the new zoning bylaw coming in for single family reduces the side yard setbacks, correct?
For the accessory dwelling unit.
To 1.2 meters from 1.5.
Correct.
And the current proposal is offering 20 feet or 6 meters of side yard setback.
I'll just double check.
Sorry.
Yeah, the site plan is on page 39 of the agenda. and it is 20 feet is the minimum.
So 6 meters.
6 meters.
6 meters. Well, this is a bit of give and take here. Just thank you. That's all I got for now. I'll wait and see what everybody else says.
Councillor Anderson?
I have, I have some comments. I was originally sort of going back and forth on this one because I'm a huge proponent for housing. But I mean, full disclosure, I live in that area. And so I have been the point of contact for a lot of people in the neighborhood. And some people that aren't in the neighborhood that have had concerns. I mean, obviously, it would have been nice if did have a couple of questions for the developer, but unfortunately, I don't think he's online. Fair enough. So that, but yeah, after speaking to probably at least a dozen folks around Helen, Rupert, that area. I think the general consensus, and we got at least a half a dozen letters on behalf of the public hearing. The major points that I have to represent for the folks that have contacted me and were vehemently opposed were on the basis of the fact that it's an environmentally sensitive area with multiple species having habitats in that area, and with the OCP saying in more than one place that it's a place that should generally be left as much as possible. So it's one of the last places in town that is fully treed. It is second growth, but it is a refuge for wildlife up there. I mean, we see wolves and bears pretty regularly, and again, I'm just trying to think of. I'm on board with multi-family residential for sure. I love that idea, but for me, I just don't think it fits in this particular spot. And the reason that I go down that road is and I've gone back and forth on this, but the more I think about it, there were other lots that already were multi-family residential that could have been bought by the proponent, and to me, it ends up feeling to me like a little bit like if you didn't go for the multifamily residential unit, but you wanted to buy a single family lot and get that upzoned or rezoned, to me that feels a little less community driven and a little more investor profit centric. And this is what I'm hearing from people that have contacted me. The general feeling that I'm getting is that if someone owns that lot and they can build on it, as long as it's somewhat in line with what's going on in the neighborhood, with the context of what's there, then there's no problem with that. So 3 units on a single family lot, that's fine. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. When you go up to 6, that's where it's hard for me to agree to that, because that's one of the most narrow roads in the entire village, in the entire town. And there's no sidewalks, and there's at least half a dozen children under the age of 10 on that road. So to increase that density, and based on the location and the distance that it is from amenities, I just feel like I have to represent the people that have come to me so vehemently opposed to it because of these reasons and the personal safety that's involved. And the risk of safety. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
I have a question for Mr. Gregg. Is it possible to pass bylaw number 1337, which changes it from single family to multifamily, but not pass bylaw 1322, which is the one that has the density of 6 units? Is it possible to do one and not the other?
Yes, that the official community plan bylaw sort of that sets the long-range land use expectation. The zoning amendment would have to follow the OCP, but the OCP doesn't trigger or mandate that the zoning follow. I've probably confused things there. You could adopt the OCP amendment on its own. You shouldn't adopt the zoning amendment on its own without first adopting the OCP amendment. if
No, I get
makes
that
sense.
for sure. But can we do 1337 and not 1322?
That is absolutely up to council. They are separate bylaws, and it's in your hands. Yes.
Councillor Mafti, do you have anything?
I do. I did a lot of thinking and a lot of reading and a lot of talking in regards to this item. To be totally blunt, I find a lot of the complaints against it to be NIMBYism. You know, we certainly heard from a lot of people who don't want this. They all have something in common. They're all going to be directly impacted. Of course, that's fair enough because those are the people who would be prompted to write in. I don't dismiss their concerns because it seems like NIMBYism, but I do think it's important to keep that in perspective. My feeling is that I don't support this, and it has more to do with the OCP angle of it. I think that this is, as Councillor Anderson said, you know, that this is a unique area. I'd like to see it preserved. I don't think this is the part of town to grow. I'm opposed to altering the OCP, and it's not specific to this application. It's in a very general sense. So although I'm opposed to this application, I'm in a bigger picture sense, I'm opposed to altering the OCP for it. So that's where I'm at on this one. I don't think that I'm in favor for any reason, and I'm opposed to it for every reason.
Okay, so you would be opposed to 1337, which is the OCP amendment.
Yeah, but I mean, to my mind, that would sort of supersede the zoning amendment as well. So I don't see any reason to split them up the way that you suggested, and so I would let my opposition on the OCP amendment lead to my opposition on the zoning amendment.
I only suggested it because 1337 gives the owner the opportunity for multifamily residential, but 1322 is the one that says up to a maximum of 6, and I think everyone agrees that density is too much.
Yeah, and I'm, again, for me, it's not about the density; it's about the OCP. So I that's why I would say no. And if the proponent wants to come back with something different, they can do that. I don't feel that it's our responsibility to sort of guide them into basically tell them, well, we're going to say no to this, but we might say yes to something else. Like if they have another proposal, they can come with another proposal, and that's totally within their right. And then I think we should judge their second proposal on its merits. So I'd be okay with just saying what you brought to us is a no, and leave it at that. That speaking for myself personally, not on behalf of all of council, of course.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kennington?
Through the mayor. So with the new legislation that's coming, and single family lots are almost going to be non-existent as far as I can tell, what is the possible density that could happen there with this new legislation without a rezoning, without an OCP amendment?
Through the mayor. So the currently the zoning would allow for a house with a secondary suite and an accessory dwelling unit. So 3 permanent long-term housing dwellings on the property, plus the main house if it were occupied as the principal residence of a person. They could apply for a business license to have up to 3 bed and breakfast guest suites within the house. And so that was sort of the equivalency of, potentially the occupant load, if you will, of the property, or sort of the use. Certainly it sometimes could be as high as 6. So that's what's currently allowed. The zoning amendment that's been adopted around the small-scale multi-unit housing in Ucluelet really filled the gap on some properties that didn't have the ability to have the secondary suite or the ADU. That's now removed so that all properties, but this one already had it. So the question is more optional. That's what was required in the rural community like this. It's more, I think what we're going to be coming up to in the coming months is a revisit of the official community plan and a community discussion on housing in particular. We're required to do a housing update. This week we got the rules shown to us for how to do the housing assessment for the next 20 years of housing. That may well result in having to look at and pre-zoning some properties for where's the kind of infill the community wants and where are we going to fit in that housing that's needed. And there's deadlines and a legislated requirement that UCLUET and all communities in British Columbia do that. So today, that's what's laid out in the report. So what the existing zoning is there what comes in the future is really up to council and really the community, in having input on that of where are the places where some more, the term there that is used frequently is the gentle density of the infill within residential areas. How much fits is that question that the community is going to have to wrestle with.
So, I'm looking at this and I see pluses and minuses to both sides. Like the current proposal is it's definitely more cars, but the existing proposal with 3 STRs, that to me creates more of a traffic problem. I mean, it's always Alberta plates that are doing air off the speed bumps in front of the school. The tourists are the ones that are causing the traffic problems in town. There's no doubt about that. So it's like quality of driver versus quantity of driver on this. The pluses of the development are substantially larger green space on either side of the building. So we're up to 12 meters in total, combining both sides versus 3 meters total. So it's quite a bit better as far as, like, something's going to go there. And I'm like, so when we're looking at this, what's the least problematic development that would go there? I would argue that the proposal is the least problematic development, but at the same time, I do agree that the road's ridiculous. So, given the road the way it is right now, I would have a really hard time saying, yeah, nine extra cars on that road would be okay, because it's not. So unless something happens with the road, then I can't support this development.
Any other comments? Okay, so we have some recommendations that we need to vote on. Oh, first of all, we can't hear from the applicant anyway because the public hearing's over. Got it. All right, so I can read the recommendations and then we can vote on each one. There's 4. So I will move that council give third reading to District of Ucluelet Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 1337, 2024. All those in favor? Those opposed?
Sorry, can I just ask a question? We have to do this first motion that you just read. We have to do this regardless. This isn't in favor or opposed of the proposal. We have to give a third reading regardless. Is that correct?
No, you can oppose this third reading.
Okay. If I oppose the development, then I should oppose the third reading, right?
Correct.
Okay. Sorry, it just wasn't clear to me, but thank you. Okay, so I'm opposed.
Okay, we'll start again. All those in favor of third reading? Those opposed of third reading? So that fails, that motion. And I'll move that council adopt District of Ucluelet Official Community. It just fails the whole thing? Okay, perfect. So we end it there, is that correct? Okay. The third bylaw item is 7.3 zoning amendment development permit for 2102 Peninsula Road.
I have to recuse myself. I'm a development consultant working on this project.
Okay, you can recuse yourself, sure. After the Director of Community Planning presents, the applicant or their representative will have an opportunity to address council.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I can't hear anything. I'm not sure if Mr. Gregg is speaking or not, but I
No.
can't hear anything on mine.
No, it was a bit of dead air. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. Just wanted to make sure.
He's just looking for his pointer for the screen.
Sorry, I thought it might come in handy.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So through the mayor, this is, as noted, this is a zoning amendment and also development permit application for 2102 Peninsula Road. This is the first council has seen it. So this is two properties that would be combined really at the entrance to town, if you will, just between Forbes and Monado Road. And so the proposal is to build a mixed commercial residential development on the property. And as I said, these are two properties. There's the one main one, which extends in this view up the hill from Peninsula Road, and then it's a bit of an L where there's a piece at the back as well. And so essentially the proposal is at the front, the two buildings, which are, so this is Peninsula Road here and the multi-use path. There's two buildings towards the front, which would be a mix of commercial uses, 4,000 square feet of commercial area on the ground floor total and within those two buildings, and 8 resort condo, so tourist accommodation, commercial uses on the upper level. And then at the back of the property are 3 buildings, each with 4 townhouses within them, so a dozen townhouses, which would be multifamily residential. So not short-term accommodation, but long-term owner or tenant, housing. And essentially, the zoning amendment part of this, because the current zoning allows a mix of uses, but the zoning amendment really is to allow those to happen in separate buildings, because that mixed commercial residential definition is kind of the old imagining storefronts on the street and housing above it. And so this sort of separating it into blocks takes a zoning amendment. So again, this is the site plan where on the right side of the screen is Peninsula Road. The sort of lower level of the property would be this commercial 2 buildings, and then it does slope up towards the rear, and then there's the 12 townhouses in the back with parking. There's a fire access possible through the neighboring property, and in this corner, just note that's shown as a little playground area for the residents. And here are some images of the buildings that are being proposed. The first step of this, as I noted, is a zoning amendment, so it would be giving notice of considering first reading at a future meeting. But then also they're seeking, presumably that if that were to be adopted, also seeking a development permit to be able to proceed with the development and the construction. And so they've given a fairly detailed thought to the form and character of the buildings that would be shown. So the views that are here are really of the lower part of the site and the commercial uses. So this would be viewed really from the driveway entrance on Peninsula Road. This is just a little bit of the multi-use path in the lower corner and sort of the corner of the commercial building. And then some views within the interior of the site. And this image, there's a discussion in the report of retaining walls, and that there is a retaining wall because the property here, this is essentially ground level at the front of the site, and then it jumps up. And so you can see this would be the top of the retaining wall. The rear of the site is above that. essentially a driveway ramps up towards it just out of view on the left. So these would be the townhouses above, and on the lower level, there's parking that's tucked in there for the commercial uses. So kind of a tiered use of the site. And in the agenda, there are the elevations of the buildings. I just put this one on the screen because I think this is what would be most prominent from the public side of things along Peninsula Road, where this is the building, the commercial building that's closest to Peninsula and the multi-use path. This sort of shows a very contemporary approach, but using materials that are kind of West Coast in their origins, if you will. I'll just sort of leave it there and see if there's any questions from council. And I know the applicant and owner or the owner is here. Perhaps whether they want to address council or just answer questions.
All right, we'll start with questions for staff. Does council have any questions for Mr. Gregg? Councillor Anderson? I can hear the wheels turning.
They're squeaky. Yeah, in this case, it's just it fits in line with sort of CS2, the zoning. Am I right on that?
Yes.
CS2, and it's just the ask is just the separation of the two units for the residential and the commercial on the other side. Like that's other than that, it fits the CS2. It's just the breakup of the two buildings. Is that right?
Through the mayor, yes. The effectively the pieces of the uses on site are allowed in the zoning. It's the definition of that mix is sort of defined one way, and the layout on the land that the applicant is proposing is to kind of separate so that the housing would be a little separate from the commercial uses. And because of, I think, the fall on the land, that seems to kind of fit. But it takes a zoning amendment to allow that to work.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any questions, Councillor Mafty?
No questions. I have my own thoughts, but I don't have any specific questions at this point. No.
Okay, would the applicant like to address council? You're good? Does council have any questions for the applicant?
I have one question, but I'll just jump in because I'm already talking. I'm wondering how integral the resort condo component of the development is to its completion. Like, is that an absolute requirement from a financial perspective? Is that something that is debatable? The only reason I ask this is because I feel like
it's a good question. I totally get it. It's a good question. So we're leaving ourselves open. So the goal in all this is probably have 700 square foot bachelor units, right? The goal is perhaps, we might be able to sell all of them as long-term accommodations, giving the owner the ability. They want to live in place or they want to be able to rent it. Sort of like what's happening at the Morridge right now, but it'd be a bit of a smaller footprint, I guess.
Okay, but I mean, would it be something that you would consider to take that resort condo use out and just say, well, we'll add these to the pool?
My preference wouldn't be, because I being having family that owns at the Morridge and seeing a lot of the owners at the Morridge, they're very transitional. They're able to come and live in Ucluelet for 8 to 10 months. They take off. They take advantage of a 60-day rental, and so what I see in the Morridge in particular, it's actually probably leaving 25% of the residents in there the ability to live in Ucluelet. So I think it's a doable option, and there's probably maybe 2 or 3 units that actually full-time do it by 12 months out of the year. So I think you would probably see similar numbers that you'd see at the Morridge.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
If there are no other questions, there is a recommended motion.
I can do that.
Councillor Anderson?
Am I on here? I will move that council direct staff to give notice of the first reading for District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1343, 2024.
I'll second.
Councillor Mafty seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed? That carries. Sure. Just giving Councillor Kennington time to come back into the room.
Got it.
Can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit.
We lost Councillor Anderson for a moment, so just give us one more moment.
I don't think it's going to be that long, actually.
Okay, we can get started here. There are 2 report items. The first report item is 8.1, Fire Services Development Design Policy number 14-7320-2. This report will be presented by the Fire Chief, Chief Geddes.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So back on April 30th, I presented Council, or Committee of the Whole, with the District of Equal Fire Services Development Design Guidelines. And it was a book of guidelines that developed with the intent of helping to speed up the process of development approval and allowing fire services to be formally considered throughout that process. The process informally has been taking place already. This just sort of formalizes the thing. So I have been working very closely with the Planning and Building Department for most of these developments. It just formalizes the whole process with the intent of speeding up the process. So today here we're looking for adoption of the policy that says the guidelines will be adhered to. Analysis of options. So some of the pros of adopting this policy: enhanced safety. It's going to help to ensure that our developments are allowed to continue, but in a safe way for public safety and as well for responders, the firefighters that have to get in and out in timely manner to help people when they need it. Also provide clear direction for developers. Black and white guidelines are always important in order to not hinder things, as well as streamlining the development process, of course. Consistency in standards is important as well, and then you know everybody knows where the goal lines are when it comes to development. Emergency service preparedness, so it'll help us prepare, minimize the amount of unknowns that we have in these new developments as well. Regulatory compliance. Again, this document is based on code standards, policies, and best practices that are already in place. So it just summarizes all of them, puts them all together in one document. And then also it's going to help with future proofing. So with anticipated future growth and changes, it's going to allow for that, such as firefighting apparatus gets bigger. Most likely, the intent is that it will hopefully allow for that as well, such as one day when we do have an aerial apparatus down the road. We do have to allow for that. So anyways, I'll gladly take any questions from council.
Thank you, Chief Geddes. And this is intended to be a living document, so changes will be made every once in a while.
Yeah, through the mayor, that's correct. Yes, it'll be a living document reviewed and updated as any relevant codes and standards and best practices change, because they do change every the fire code gets updated every 4 years, and NFPA codes very similar. So as those relevant codes that pertain to development specifically are updated, then it's anticipated that this guideline will also be updated. The policy will stay the same, but the guideline itself will be updated.
Thank you. Any questions for the chief? No, seeing none, there is a recommendation.
I'll move that.
Okay, Councillor Kennington.
I'll move that council adopt District of Ucluelet Fire Services Development Design Policy number 14-7320-2.
I will second that.
Councillor Anderson seconds. Any further discussion?
Just want to reiterate how much I appreciate this document. And I think it's going to be a really good model.
Through the mayor, thank you very much. It's a lot of work, but I feel strongly it'll be worth it for everybody in the long run.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we were all impressed when you presented it at the committee of the whole.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any further discussion? All those in favor? None opposed? That carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your hard work.
My pleasure.
The final report item is 8.2, Environmental Development Permit for 354 Passive Milford. After the Director of Planning presents, the applicant will have an opportunity to address council. Mr. Gregg.
Through the mayor, this application for 345 Passive Milford, it's an environmental development permit. It's fairly straightforward. I think the proposal in a nutshell would be reducing the width of an existing path that was laid, a gravel path, and then revegetating the site. That there's an environmental report which is quite comprehensive, and it's something that certainly aligns, and so the permit has been drafted to reflect the recommendations of the biologist, and so really this is one of those examples where we actually had a discussion at the staff level. Could this be just done under delegated authority that we currently have, but because environmental development permits, I don't think any of them have been done that way. They've all come to council because they're relatively new. Many of the environmental DP areas were established with the adoption of the OCP in 2022, so they've all come to council. But this is, I think, an example of here's a comprehensive package, and here it is before you. So I'll just see if there's any questions, and otherwise see if the applicant has anything to add.
It does seem pretty straightforward. Any questions for staff? Councillor Mafty, anything from you?
No questions. Seems pretty cut and dry.
Perfect. Do we know if the applicant is online? Oh, there you are. Okay. Would you like to address us?
I guess we're green here. So basically, before last Friday, we didn't realize that we did not have an approved development permit. We thought it was approved by the staff in early May. So when Madeline emailed us on Friday to say that this meeting was going to happen, we immediately went, oh my goodness, and reviewing her pages that came to us, we realized that we were not in complete agreement with the requirements of it immediately, in that we haven't told the district that we've already started. So what we have planted, we are 100% sure is following Adam Compton's report, the drawing that I did up, the intention of what we're doing on the site. So basically, the only, I would, probably should apologize for not doing my homework, but being a 70-year-old Luddite and not wanting to sort of sit on the computer too much, I didn't know what the development permit bylaw said. So I guess going further, I should call the district office earliest, probably tomorrow or the next day, and arrange an inspection of what we've done to make sure that everybody's in agreement with where we're going and the methods, and just to make sure that the district's in full know of what's going on.
So you're actually reducing the scope of the path.
Oh, the path, yeah. The path, in talking with an equipment operator, it's Reg Payne with his small Kubota that's helping us there. His recommendation is to basically do all of the planting with the intent of relocating the path as shown on the drawing. And then it would be almost the last thing we would do, because everything that he does in going up and down the hill to get there is going to mess up the path. So we will be planting plants with the serpentine kind of shape of the path in mind, but you may not see a proper path there for a while. So we've purchased approximately $5,000 worth of salal and evergreen huckleberry and California myrtle, and we have approximately 150 plants planted. And we had difficulty getting a landscape contractor even to answer our calls. So we decided to just take over the job ourselves. And that has actually gone pretty well, even though we are going reasonably slow. We will have a substantial amount of planting done before the end of the season. The other point, which was repeated in the development permit language, was that the recommended time period for planting was only been in the month of October. Because it's a reasonably steep access slope with some soils that are become kind of problematic when it gets wet, we didn't think that the month of October was going to be reasonable. What I have to do is augment the soils for every particular planting hole, and I'm using about a complete wheelbarrow of mixed up soil, compost, and peat moss, none of which I can do when it's wet. So we're working on dry days, and through the summer season, we're just going to have to keep watered what's going in. So there is text in his report about that, but he does actually make the point that he recommends only planting in October. I would not be able to put a machine down in there to dig our holes for us, and it's just physically impossible to dig the holes for planting yourself. So I do need that small Kubota to be able to go down there. So we did make the decision to start in the middle of May, right after getting our order of plants. So that's basically where we are right now.
Great, thank you. Does council have any questions for the applicant? Councillor Mafty, you're good?
No, I'm good. Makes sense to me.
Okay. There is a recommended motion. Councillor Anderson?
Sure. I'll move the council authorize the Director of Community Planning to execute and issue development permit 24-01 for the property at 354 Passive Milford to allow a 3-foot wide crushed gravel pathway and landscaping with the intent of enhancing the foreshore.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Kennington, any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thanks for sitting through the whole meeting to have your say. Are there any notices of motion? Okay, there are 4 correspondence items. Would council like to bring any of them forward? I think the 4th item is a letter of support request from Rain Coast Education Society. That was one of our late items.
I don't know that there's any discussion to be had, but I'm going to recuse myself because obviously I'm in a conflict of interest as the person requesting the letter of support. And the only thing I'll say is to be clear, the intent was for a letter of support from mayor and council as representatives of the community. There's no direct benefit to myself personally. If there are any questions, I can answer them, but otherwise I'll recuse myself from any further discussion.
And this was a letter of support for the BC Community Gaming Grant funds, correct?
Sir, yes, I'm speaking on behalf of the res at this point. We would like to apply to the BC Gaming Grant to support our ongoing field school program and other youth education programs. The work that we do is within the scope of the grant, so we're hoping to put in an application to see if we can get some funding. One of the things the BC Gaming Association looks at is whether or not the work being proposed is of community benefit, and so that's why we're looking for letters of support from the communities in which we operate to indicate that yes, this is something that people here value and would like to see continue.
Great, thank you.
Do we need to make a motion for that, or?
Yeah, we'll need a motion to do that. Oh, can you leave the room, Councillor Mafty?
Yeah, I was just about to ask. Okay, so I'm going to leave my camera on and I'm just going to literally walk out this door, but then I don't know how to come back in. Like, if I come back in like a minute, is that enough?
Yeah, I would say a minute would be fine. What time?
Okay.
What time is it there right now? By the way.
3:30 in the morning.
Oh my gosh. Okay, we won't leave you hanging out there too long.
Okay.
Any discussion about this?
No, I think the community benefit is obvious.
Yeah, for sure.
So do we move that from, is this a District of Euclid or is this mayor and council? The letter of support.
He wants the letter from mayor and council.
So I will move that mayor and council provide a letter of support request, provide a letter of support that highlights how the BC Community Gaming Grants funds would be spent in support of our RES Field School program. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Anderson seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. There is a letter from Patricia Sieber regarding High Focus Island. And just a question to staff, is the Acoustics Group going to be presenting to council in the near future, Mr. Lawrence?
Yes, we anticipate that they're going to be presenting in the near future. But I believe the next council meeting, maybe Mr. Gregg would be able to respond.
Thank you.
Through the mayor, we have an active application that is under review. There's some additional information we believe they're going to be providing, and we're meeting with them this week. So we'll have a better sense of the timeline. But depending on when they actually submit that information, it could be on the next council meeting, or which would be July 9th. All right, or
Correct.
later in July.
Okay, thank you. And you can come back. Okay, and the letter from Peter Timmermans about Terrace Beach. Mr. Gregg, maybe I should have had you stay up there to address the parking. That I think the intention was that the parking would stay there, but now it looks like it's not.
Through the mayor, so Seabridge Way is the name of the road right-of-way that goes through from Peninsula Road to Terrace Beach. The parking on both sides there is on public land. That the development on the north side actually widened or gave land to the municipality as part of their whole development process. They agreed to have a slice, so now it's a regular full-width 20-meter road right-of-way through there. So there's essentially the property line is where there's a new retaining wall, and so there's room for a public pathway to access the beach. But the parking that's there is on public land. The mayor may recall a few years ago, before the developments began, there was a discussion that began with the Terrace Beach Resort about the potential of leasing some of that space and for parking for the resort. That it is now that the development is complete and it's possible to kind of define that parking better than it has been in the past, it certainly is timely to revisit that. But currently it is, that whole strip, it is public land, and there's no agreement for private use or exclusive use of the parking in that area.
So that's in your work plan, is it?
Among many other items, yes, we haven't received a request from the resort to expedite that. And really what's happened most recently is that construction is completed. It was being used temporarily with agreement for staging and whatnot, and now the land is sort of clear, and we did a bit of first, most prominently, there's no budget to do improvements there, but to try and define the areas to make sure that the fire access was maintained open was the most immediate thing. So there's some immediate temporary moves to kind of better define, because people were parking all over the place, and hopefully it's a little clearer with wheel stops now. But that discussion is absolutely worth revisiting, and it's something we've been discussed internally.
And that would probably have to be initiated by the planning department, not by Terrace Beach Resort.
It's timely. Certainly we will bring it forward. It was some discussion with council. It's really up to council, and we would reach out to them because the ownership has changed. Some time has gone by, and so I think that's essentially at the moment it's encroaching on private land or on public land if private an entity is using it for parking. So it really, there is a process to go through if that's going to be part of what's going forward.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the update. And then the last piece of correspondence is from Amy Shimzu from Howlers. Good timing. You just walked in the door. So just a question to staff. Is Hazelwood aware of some of these complaints that the businesses have put forward?
So staff, I can't speak directly for Hazelwood, but I do know that staff in Hazelwood and the contractors, including Matt Culhaney, who's the project management engineer, have been in conversations with many of the business owners. The director of engineering and operations has been in touch with them. So we definitely, they definitely are engaging on issues that as they are identified, and having conversations with the various interested parties and affected property owners.
Okay, thank you. And you will have a chance to speak during the public input if you like. Okay, there are two information items. The first information item is staff report titled 11.1 Small Craft Harbor Report Update. This report will be presented by the Director of Community Services, Ms. Fortune. And our Harbor Master, Kevin Quartz.
Still have to pull that down. Before you have an information report for the last 3 months in the harbor, and I won't go through it step by step, but if there's any questions, Kevin and I are here to answer any questions for you.
Maybe just a quick synopsis. It was a really interesting report.
Oh, thank you. So what we did was we looked at a number of the project updates, which are currently in line with the budget process, with the garbage compound and the Whiskey Dock extension were the two main ones we were looking at as well. The boat count is something similar to last year, Kevin? Yes. So no huge difference in terms of the boat count, and the boat count is the number of boats actually on the wharfs themselves. The revenue is up approximately 12% from the revenue this time last year, so that's a good sign. And I think one of the key trendings that our harbor manager has talked about is the harbor is trending to longer year-round stays for locals and non-residents. And currently 52 steps is approximately 90% full, correct? Ongoing upgrades and maintenance, as always, is something that Kevin is certainly on top of. The fisheries update is Chinook salmon saw lower participation from 2023. The Ling cod is a strong showing with 3 boats bringing in over 7 deliveries going out. The longline halibut, they're in the middle of it from mid-May to June, and the trawlers go year-round. And just kind of glancing here, beautification has been one of the key things that Kevin's been looking at and working with our park staff, so that's kind of a neat grouping going on. And then we are working with West Coast Wild Adventures, which that will probably change, so that's an update that I will bring you to the next council meeting. Although there was a plan to go with a fuel boat moorage, Louis is re-looking at that, so hopefully we'll have some more information for you guys for next time.
Oh, okay, because that motion was back in 2022, so he's actually looking at a different situation now?
Correct. So through the mayor in 2022, this was passed, and then West Coast Wild Adventure was required to do some information themselves, and that was just restarted. Louis had an injury, so that put things on hold for a bit. And then recently, Louis Head of West Coast Wild Adventure had approached me for moving forward, and now he's looking at a pivot point. So Kevin and I are working with him to see what that looks like.
Great. And the Whiskey Dock extension, the lower dock extension, is that specifically for the seaplane, the Harbor Air? Or were we going to do that regardless of whether Harbor Air
That's
was coming or
correct,
not?
yes. That was the intent all along, was that project was going to be done regardless. We do have 3 quotes, and we're just waiting to do a little bit of shuffling with that one at the moment.
Great.
And
I love the picture of the sea lions.
yeah. Oh, that's right. I kind of glossed over the sea lions.
Oh my goodness, they
How
kept
could
me
I do
awake
that?
so many nights.
When Kevin sent me that picture, I was like, oh my goodness, okay. Is there any questions from council?
Councillor Mafty, any questions?
No, just to see my boat still doing okay while I'm gone.
It's still fine.
Apparently it's still there.
Well, that's a good thing.
Excellent.
I only hear good things about the harbor master.
Yeah, so do I. Great. One question I had, and you might not know this until later on in the summer, have the American fishermen, the sports fishing guys, have they sort of come back since COVID? How's that looking?
Slowly last year, they came back. With customs being closed, we've lost a lot of the ones that would come up from Oregon because they can't clear customs here. And to go all the way up and into Victoria, then come here, they don't. We're getting NORPAC coming in July 19th, so there'll be 38 sail and power vessels with the Seattle Yacht Club.
Oh, wow.
So that's the busier ones that are coming at one time, but definitely getting more U.S. guys coming back again, so yes.
Great. And is there any discussion about reopening customs here in Ucluelet?
Through the mayor, it is on my work project. It's one of the things we're going to look at as we move in. It was identified in the Harbor Master Plan. So yes, that is on the work plan.
Great. And we do have a head lease now, correct?
We do. All signed in and everything.
Perfect. That's great. Well, thank you very much for your report. The next item, support for downloading costs on municipalities. It was a really, really interesting report, particularly on page 400. Did you see how much Kamloops gets in parking revenue? 2019, it was 2 million. 2020, 1 million. 2021, $1.4 million. 2022, $1.4 million. 2023, $1.5 million almost. If only we could be so lucky. And I also thought it was interesting on page 394. It shows their strategic plan, and they broke it down into sort of four broad categories with subcategories. I just thought it was interesting because we've been working on our strategic plan review recently, and we've got a follow-up coming up July 4th, I believe. It's just interesting to see what other communities do with their strategic plans. Anyone want to discuss that report further?
And they're doing that without a mayor, I think.
And they're doing all that without a mayor, that's right. Okay, mayor's announcements. I hadn't forgotten, but thank you, Abby, for putting this on my desk. Canada Day festivities are on Monday, July the 1st from noon till 3 at the Village Green. And there's going to be kids' activities. I'm assuming hot dogs and cake and live music, games. Praz is participating as well. So that's going to be great. Hope to see everybody there. All right, Councillor Anderson. what have you been up to?
All right, I'll go quick here. So since the last meeting, what else? What did I do here? I had the Euclid Elementary School Grade 1 class do a tour of the district building. So they got to play out front and then go in, and that was actually really fun, and we got some really positive feedback on that. And you would think that would be a dry thing for the kids to do, but they loved it. And then we had, was it Shirley Martin came for the to talk about the binnacle and show the photos, historic photos, and the compass, the old boat compass in the district office in the front. That was really neat. The kids loved it. And then when so we did a tour of the building, and when they came back down, the planning department had put out a giant map, and the kids got to put a circle or a little sticker on where their house was. So
That's fun.
They're all ready for a job in planning in the future now. They got it figured out. What else was there? I had an ACHN meeting. Faye Mizar spoke for the Family Resource Coalition. She did a summary. I think she's leaving that organization and moving to Island Health, I believe. And then what else was there? We had the meeting with the Euclid First Nation Council to Council. Maybe I'll let you speak a little more about that. I thought that was a great meeting, and that'll be great to keep that communication open with those guys. And we also did we sat in with a meeting with Arif, the development company, with staff, and the three of us, I guess, right? We're at that. And that's about it for me.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hoare is en route on a ferry right now. Councillor Kennington.
June 17th, the UFN meeting, and that was excellent. Great to hear that we have a lot of similar priorities and that there's really something we can do together there. So I'm looking forward to expanding on that going forward. Housing being one of the key, housing and infrastructure, which seems to be on everybody's mind. And then today we met with SD70 board and we discussed very similar things. So there are shared visions and how we can work together. So a lot of collaborative meetings, and then that's it.
Great, thank you. Councillor Mafty, you've been away for most of the month, so probably no meetings for you.
None relevant to the business of Euclid, I'm sorry to say, but I'm back soon, and I'm looking forward to it.
Great, thank you. For myself, on June the 12th, the ACRD had a committee of the whole meeting regarding revisiting how they do their grants and aid program. And I missed the meeting because I was at another meeting, but I'm looking forward to the minutes. But just for comparison, in this year, 2024, they allocated approximately $300,000 worth of grants and aid. So quite the larger budget than we have. But I'll look forward to hearing what sort of strategies they've come up with to change up their grant and aid program. June 13th, I had a mayor's Zoom meeting. There's a few of us that connected at AVICC conference, and we do a once a month Zoom call with each other, and that's always interesting to see what challenges and celebrations that all the different communities have. June 17th was a meeting with Ucluelethat over at their community center, and yeah, it was a great meeting. It went way over time because we had so much to talk about, but a lot of commonalities and some projects that we think we can work on together. They're particularly keen to they were particularly keen to hear about our RMI funds that actually pay for historical signage around town, and they would love to participate in that process to have a few signs talking about their history, and I think Miss Fortune will be connecting with them about that. So that was a great meeting. And then on June 18th, we met with Arif again regarding their proposal for Monado Bay. And at that meeting, the planning staff and engineering staff were there as well. So that was great to talk about any sort of challenges that they might have and what some possible solutions would be to those. On Saturday, I went to the high school grad, and I haven't been to a high school grad for probably 20 years, so I wasn't sure what to expect, but it was really, really fun. And just to see them all dressed up was fantastic. There were a lot of them. This is one of the larger classes I've seen in a long, long time. And they actually had 2 valedictorians, not just one, but 2. And yeah, it was an awesome afternoon. And then this morning, yes, we met with School District 70, and again, a lot of things we can work on together. And we all always say after the meetings with them that we should do this more often. So we're going to try and do that. And I think that's it for my meetings. Okay, so question period. This is an opportunity for the public to ask questions and comment on matters within Council's jurisdiction. Representations about bylaws that Council is prohibited from holding a public hearing on, or bylaws that were subject to a public hearing, are not permitted at this time. Are there any audience members that wish to address Council? Amy, head over to the mic. And please just state your name and address.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Shimizu, and my address is 878 Barclay Place. Thank you for this moment to hear my voice. That's really all I came here for. Is this more of a question period where I would ask you questions, or can I also leave examples of what I've kind of experienced in this project that's been happening in front of,
yes,
especially my restaurant and, in the area?
Yeah, comments are fine, sure.
Okay. Just a couple examples. And this is more, actually, I think my concerns or my questions were more directed to planning and the timing. I was 2 years ago or so, I think that's when the meetings, we were all invited to come and join to hear about what the plans were for this particular revitalization project. And we were asked to give our input and look at the maps and whatnots. And so I came to all of those, and I'm open-minded and I'm welcoming the change. But where I saw a little bit of a major disconnect or what have you was that we were told on multiple meetings and promised that this project would be starting in the fall. And that's where we were all feeling like, okay, at least we can get through our summer, our 3 months where we can push through our business so that we can sustain everyone through the winter. That's how Ucluelet, in my opinion, for the years that I've been running a business you've got June, July, August, and a bit of September to really give her your all. Maximum people coming and minimum time to rest. So when I would run into James and ask when this is planned starting, and he was saying he wasn't sure because we thought it was going to be happening, quite some time ago, due to the waiting on the grant, I suppose. Maybe that's why it started sooner. So my question is, I suppose, from all that is, where did it go from starting in the fall after we were able to, especially after the prior years? We all know we suffered a very difficult summer for business. Between Tofino and Ucluelet, $44 million worth of revenue was lost in just June and half of July, or June, July. That's a lot. And we were one of those businesses that struggled. We had, staffing was an issue because we had too many staff. And then so they had to wait to start. And then it was a big bang. This is the same situation as well for this particular situation of how this timing is happening. I have a big team ready to go. I've now had to let some of them hold back. They've now had to find other jobs because it's been quite a bit slower for all of June. Dead slow. to the point where we had to close our lunches because nobody wanted to deal with the crazy lineup in front of Howlers backed up. No one's going to sit in that lineup and try to find parking on our parking lot. So we had to make the difficult decision to close our lunches and wait this all out. So anyways, that being said, my main question is, how did it go from fall start, like say September long weekend? Right after that, we can give it a go. We got amazing weather until at least November. And, you know, it would have been the same amount of time maybe, or that was the original plan. So why did it start in the spring? And then we're already a month behind. After 2 months of work, I was already told by one of the foremen. So I know we're behind. So that's, again, deepening into our abilities to thrive in the limited time we have for summer business. Sorry, it's a long-winded question.
No problem.
A little bit of a backstory.
I don't know if staff has an answer.
That's
for
fair.
that,
Exactly.
but Mr. Lawrence may have an answer.
I don't have a complete answer. I have a partial answer to that. So during the there's no one factor that plays into it. So one of the primary ones was during the planning process and then moving into the design, it was identified that the storm system was basically failed underneath Peninsula Road. So when that occurred, additional design engineering work needed to occur. And then there was also additional engagement with the Ministry of Transportation, which has jurisdiction over top of that roadway and is partly responsible for that system. So they're contributing $600,000, if memory serves, to the project towards that, and then it's then contributing for their repaving of the actual roadway, which is something that they were planning to do, which was brought into the project to save the municipality some funds. So those things kind of factored into the whole system of some design complexities that we had to work through, then a change due to the storm system having to be integrated into it, and then working with the Ministry of Transportation to get authorization to do it, RFP. So it there's never any one decision point or one aspect of it, but it's kind of the culmination of a whole pile of factors that built up to delay the project a little bit.
Yes.
And then, you know, then it delays it.
Right. And was there no, I mean, was there no way to delay it a few months more to start back into that promised time frame of starting, so that all of the businesses would be, you know, it's not so held back in the ability to sustain what's kind of the people that are coming, or just the original problem?
I can definitely answer that, if Mayor, if you may. So unfortunately, there is a grant for the redevelopment of the original project, which was the bike path, pedestrian area, ground improvements above. That had to be expended by March 31st of this year. Otherwise, we lose $750,000 of grant funding. So if we didn't start, we lose out on basically the entire project. So it's not one factor, it's a multiple, it's just a whole sequence of events, and it's a sequence of events, unfortunately, and then those requirements for grant funding. So we would have loved to delay it for another 6 months and start in the fall and not disrupt anything. That would have been absolutely fantastic. Paving would still have to be occurring between that sort of April, May, June, because the asphalt plant is
Fair
closed.
enough. Fair enough.
Open.
Yeah.
So
as long as we're not going in July, August, September, it's like,
yes.
it's going to be heavy traffic.
The final lift, so asphalt is going down tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday. So you'll have actual pavement starting tomorrow. And then the final lift of pavement will be the next week. So the whole roadway, including parking, will be fully paved in the next week and a half.
Okay. Thank you. that answers the question of the timing of it. So understandably, if you would have lost the abilities to have that grant, so you just had to go with that time frame. That makes sense. Another question then, I'm not sure if this is something that sounds like it might be getting addressed as we speak right now, but as you know, Howlers is a fairly large property. There's a lot of cars, huge groups. We service constantly groups of minimum 20, up to 55 people. We were getting groups of 55 people, like groups all at once to come and eat at our restaurant. That particular weekend, we were left with just, the cement was drying and was supposed to be cured by Friday night. But because Hazelwood, obviously they don't work weekends, unfortunately, which is unfortunate because there's so much heavy traffic coming in on the weekends outside of Ucluelet that it is wreaking havoc on these roads and whatnots. But they left a big gravel pile in front of my parking lot to block it off, and I had the entire weekend of no parking lot access, even though just based on the fact that the timing wasn't, like had they started in the morning, maybe it would have cured by whatever time, but instead I had the whole extra weekend to deal with no parking and people, navigating through the gravel. It's hard on these big groups. And I will say something that I'm very sad to see during this process is so many elder people not coming to our restaurant because we lost something that was promised to me in the first couple meetings as well, was our accessible parking that was directly in front of Howlers, which has been there for a long time, and I was promised multiple times that would be put into the works and made sure that we can still have an accessible parking. It's not too much to ask. People are not going to want that have difficulty walking to come to our restaurant at all. Like, it's just not a thing. It's not been happening, in fact. And as I was getting into my car today to come here, two fellows were walking and just some extra bits of this and that, and just one person tripped right over it. Someone earlier today actually got high-centered between Relic and I in the parking lot because they finished the grading, or if the flattening of the gravel, and it left too much distance, and what they did was left a 1x1 strip of wood, just like tucked it under in the corner to try to help with that angle, but it wasn't enough. And so she got stuck on there, and that's the second time someone's got stuck off our property in their vehicle. So it's just, there's been a lot of things that have been happening, and it's just, I just wanted to come here and let you know these are some of the things that have been happening, and I just wanted to tell you our story, and that's basically it. I don't know what kind of changes much more can happen. We already know we're in the works of the process, and I'm happy to see that we're gonna have some beautiful roads and this and that, but there's just a lot of things that I'm seeing right directly in front of Howlers. Oh, sorry, one more thing. We were told we were gonna get 3 parking spots, and if you notice, the cutout for the parking spots in front of Howlers is very shallow, and if you go further up and see the other following businesses, their parking is quite a bit deeper. So I'm not sure why and how we got a very shallow one. And then if you go directly beyond Howlers, the cement curbs have already been made. So I was told that the road will be extended on the other side where the Welcome to Ucluelet sign is. So it's going to go straight up against that. But I don't see space for us to park there and then people to safely come around the parked cars to this narrow opening. So that was another concern I had. And I did send out emails just questioning, like wondering, like, is it enough room? Is it safe to, you know what I mean? And I didn't ever hear back from Hazelwood. But, luckily James and I have been corresponding, so I have been getting some sort of correspondence, not necessarily always exactly directed answers, but very much, just keeping that correspondence open so I'm not just left in the dark. So I appreciate that. But I haven't heard anything from Hazelwood. And if I may give one more example, that'll be all. The very first beginning of this project, we were given a notice by the district and Hazelwood combined letter saying that on this particular date, the date eludes me right now, but I do have it, there will be a water shutoff from 9 to 5 p.m. and complete water shutoff, 9 to 5, no problem. I guess we're closing. So we closed our restaurant. I came in early with jugs of water to come in and just get prepping and be ready for opening for 5 o'clock. And I was noticing that the water was still on. So I waited a bit longer. And then finally by 3 o'clock, I called the district. I was like, hey guys, I need to open. I'm just wondering when you guys are going to shut the water off. And then I was told that there was no water shut off. In fact, it was just a gear down. Just for maybe 20 minutes or so. And I would have loved to have known that actually was going to be happening versus we could stay open with the water gear down. You know, we could make it work. But if we're told we don't have any water, we can't open. We cannot sustain people into our restaurant. No bathroom, no hand washing, no, just fresh water. But it was there. So that was my first experience with this whole situation, and then further on with these extra other things. So thank you for listening, guys. No hard feelings. I'm just frustrated. I'm a little bit concerned. I'm a little bit worried for our season. It's very expensive to run a business these days with inflation. Tax bill is $2,000 more. I've got an $18,600 tax bill. Last year it was not great. For summer, this summer has been not a good start yet, and we don't have that much time left. So I just hope that my voice is heard, and if there's any positive that comes out of this, great. If not, oh well, I mean, life goes on and we're just gonna keep on trucking and whatnot, so. But hopefully James has gotten my emails and listened to the more specific concerns about the actual setup of how things have been going on in front of Howlers. But yeah.
Great. Thank you for your comments.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time, guys.
You bet. Anyone else in the audience that would like to speak?
Make Noel, 1302 Victoria. I just really want to echo, because she's not going to come in here one more time, and she'll never complain. She's a warrior. But really, the answer of we're going to lose out on $750,000. She's not going to share the books, but we're talking $10,000, $15,000 ring outs she should be having. She's not having any of them, and I don't know, we're not going to get a decision here tonight, but you really have to put some thought in about the effect. And I was your mayor when this wonderful idea comes forward. And I know standing there, in front of Howlers, it definitely was a two-part thing. What was happening across the street, ensuring there was parking, a proper sidewalk, down in front of number one. They're probably paying $14,000. There's probably $100,000 in property tax down that street they have to pay in 2 weeks. And it's like, sorry, we couldn't miss out on $750,000. I mean, I'm hoping you guys were at the table and made that decision to say, you know what, we can't lose that $750,000. This is tragic. I mean, town is slow, and you guys are talking about stuff that's got nothing to do with life in Ucluelet, and I just find it frustrating to see her here, away from her tables, and trying to figure out how to be open tomorrow, and we're just trying to figure out, okay, thanks. And you won't see me back in either. I appreciate you moving my project forward, and we're trying to do things, but we're getting hung up on silly things, right? Mark asking me earlier, it's nightly rental or long-term rental. People need options. And I think that I hope you can get some breakthrough in your planning, some of your planning issues, and getting things sorted out so we can get doing business. The only job in town right now is construction. It's not tourism. And okay, that's all I got.
Thanks for your comments. Anyone else in the audience that would like to speak? Are there any members of the public attending by Zoom that would like to speak?
If anyone on Zoom wishes to speak, please raise your hand. No hands are raised.
And anyone on telephone?
If anyone on the phone wishes to speak, please dial *9. No one on the phones either.
And have we received any emails to community input?
There are no new emails.
Okay, I will move that the June 25th, 2024 regular council meeting be closed to the public pursuant to the following sections of the community charter. 90 brackets 1 brackets A, personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality, or another position appointed by the municipality. 90 brackets 1 brackets G, litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality. 90 brackets 1 brackets I, the receipt of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. And 90 brackets 2 brackets B, the consideration of information received and held in confidence relating to negotiations between the municipality and a provincial government or the federal government or both, or between a provincial government or the federal government or both and a third party. The meeting is now closed to the public at 7:05. Thank you for coming.